Chapter 1749. Su Fengnian did not answer the question, but asked, "Do you know how Chao Chongqing convinced Wang Sui? Do you know how Wang Sui feels now?" Gu Jiantang hesitated for a moment. The former is simple. Wang Sui has always been unable to let go of the Dongyue royal family, which has become Liang's lackey. Chao Chongqing should have promised him that in the future, he would be able to become an official or even a minister. As for the latter, it's hard to say. Maybe Wang Sui will really help Beimang invade the Central Plains in anger. Maybe he will be so depressed that he can only stay in one place and fight with you and me on the battlefield as a general. After all, he and I are mortal enemies. He also has a lot of resentment for the Su family's destruction of Chuanxiu. Su Fengnian sighed. No one can let go of Chuanxiu. Gu Jiantang, who had finished eating the dumplings, put down his chopsticks and looked at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian came back to his senses. If there are no accidents, Beimang will go south this autumn. I will try my best to persuade Wang Sui not to be a troublemaker even if he doesn't cooperate with you and me. Gu Jiantang nodded and said in a low voice, "That's the best." Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, has promised me that no matter what happens, he will remain neutral. As long as you can convince Wang Sui to bide his time, Gu Jiantang will personally lead the two Liao elites north into the heart of the Great Desert after the Great War of Liangmang enters a stalemate. We will sever the connection between Northern Mang and the Northern Court in one go. At that time, you and I will use Beimang and Nanchao as our depth. We will have a total of 500,000 soldiers and 200,000 iron cavalry. We won't have to worry about the lack of soldiers and can advance and retreat freely. Even if we are sandwiched between Beimang and Liang, what is there to be afraid of? Su Fengnian was silent for a moment, and then suddenly slammed the table. Jiang and I was shocked, and Gu Jiantang's eyelids trembled. Su Fengnian shouted, "Waiter, 3 more bowls of dumplings." Jiang and I took a deep breath and muttered unwillingly with a dark face, "2 bowls is enough." However, the next sentence of the prodigal son, who did not feel bad about not spending his own money, made her feel relieved. Su Fengnian said to Gu Jiantang, "Let's put it on credit. I'll have to trouble Master Gu to help pay for it today. My wife and I are embarrassingly short of money. We can't wait to split a copper coin in half," Gu Jiantang said with a fake smile. "Oh? That 1 bowl was enough. Like Miss Jiang, I'm not hungry." Blushed and whispered said 2 bowls. "I'll have another bowl too." "You ask, how many bowls, how many bowls, how many bowls, how many bowls? 3 bowls do you have to pay?" Gu Jiantang, the great pillar state of Liang, said 1 bowl. Jiang Si, the emperor of Dechu, said 2 bowls. Su Fengnian, the king of Beiliang, said 3 bowls. The waiter looked at the 3 of them and said angrily, "All right, you 3 don't have to be so stingy. I will treat you to 3 bowls of dumplings for free today." 3 bowls of hot and fragrant dumplings were placed on the table. Gu Jiantang was the first to finish eating. After bidding farewell to Su Fengnian, he led his horse to the stall owner, leaving behind the Liaodong horse that was worth hundreds of taels of silver, and returned to the north alone. The stall owner and the waiter looked at each other. In the end, the 2 of them could not stop smiling. After Su Fengnian finished eating the dumplings, he quietly waited for Jiang and I to finish eating. When he saw Jiang and I put her chopsticks on the edge of the bowl, he smiled and helped her take the chopsticks off the bowl and neatly place them on the table next to the white bowl. One of the few rules of the old Su family is not to put the chopsticks on the bowl after eating. She blushed, blinked her eyes, and asked softly, "Are you really going to be that?" Su Fengnian said softly, "Gu Jiantang's words can be trusted, but not completely. It is too scary for a person to be able to go from Hongjia to Yonghui and then to Xiangfu." Jiang and I nodded and said, "I don't like this person. Uncle Chui Wai Zhao said that your father is a tiger out of the forest, Yi Baikue is a flood dragon by the river, Wang Sui is a python by the stream, and Gu Jiantang is a snake by the hole. The first 3 are all heroes who do not care about personal life and death, honor and disgrace. Only Gu Jiantang's thoughts are the most gloomy and unpredictable." Su Fengnian grunted, "I will be careful." Jiang and I had a big heart. She had heard of Gu Jiantang being the emperor, so she did not care. She suddenly became sad and said pitifully, "Can't you save Uncle Chui Wai Zhao? If Bailiang had Uncle Chui Wai Zhao to come up with plans, you would not be so tired." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "It is not that I do not want to save him, but that I cannot save him." After a long silence, Jiang and I suddenly said carefully, "Uncle Chui Wai Zhao schemed against you. Do not be angry." Su Fengnian shook his head and said with a smile, "It is not important whether I am angry or not. I only know that the conqueror of West Chu is very angry at the world, so he wants to vent his anger on Great Peace City." The little mud person lowered her head and started to wipe her tears. She sobbed, "I do not want Uncle Chui Wai Zhao to die." Su Fengnian did not know how to comfort her. He only said softly, "The spring and autumn period is really over. Great Peace City." Wave after wave of arrow rain did not stop as they furiously rained down on that green robe. But the chess pieces outside the city were placed faster and faster. Almost as soon as a pillar of light hit the top of Great Peace City, a second pillar of light from the 9 heavens would follow closely behind. Every time a chess piece was placed and a pillar of light appeared, all the arrows would shatter in midair. They could not get close. The eaves of the palaces and pavilions in Great Peace City were shattered. The bell and drum towers of the temples and Taoist temples were also slightly shorter. The birds and pigeons in the city seemed to feel the pressure of the sky sinking. They flew lower and lower until they were below the tall pavilions. They had no choice but to circle anxiously under the eaves. The spring water thawed and gradually warmed. The fish that had been swimming leisurely in the rivers and lakes began to jump out of the water and call out to the birds in the sky. On the top of the city wall, Chai Qingshan had already attacked once. The sword on his back, Wild Fox, truly displayed the presence of an earth immortal. It tore through the air with dazzling light. The majesty of the sword Qi and the vastness of the sword Intent caused an enormous white arc to appear between the top of the city wall and the green-robed chess player. The white arc rose from the top of the city wall and landed on top of the green-robed Xiao Changqing's head. In the end, the white arc seemed to collide with an invisible pool of lightning that could not be crossed. It created a large ball of sparks and lightning, and the sound was ear-piercing. The sect master of the Dongyue sword pool raised his arm high into the air and drew in his qi. The wild fox quickly flew around Xiao Changqing, who was sitting cross-legged. Unfortunately, no matter how great the commotion was, the flying sword could only fly around like a headless fly. It was unable to get within 10 meters of Xiao Changqing. Chapter 1750. When the flying sword could not bear the weight and broke, Chai Qingshan swallowed the blood that had surged to his throat. He took a step forward and pointed forward with 2 fingers. He shouted, "Borrow the sword." The long sword on the young girl's back instantly flew out of its scabbard. Like a young serpent coming out of the water, a green energy as thick as the mouth of a well smashed forward. The presently young river and lake had not reached the stage of withering incense, but people with eyes could see that it was turning from prosperity to decline. It was rumored that Huang Sanjia had gone against the flow and poured the remaining luck of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn into the pool of the Jianghu. Therefore, in the past 20 years, the water was full. The Jianghu of Liang seemed to be full of vegetation and life, but in reality, there were not many trees left. The liveliness would not last long. In this city that was the most virtuous in the world, Gu Jiantang and Xia Guining were no longer in the city. Yang Taisui, Han Xingxian, Master Lu Hao, and Qi Jiajia had died one after another. The qi cultivators of the imperial astronomer had almost all died. The 2 large formations that were the eyes of the formation had been destroyed in the hands of Su Fengnian. Therefore, Chai Qingshan had to stand out. The old man was for the sect, for his disciple, and for his own way of the sword. When the long sword in the scabbard of the young girl came at him like a swimming dragon, Xiao Changqing was still unmoved. He smiled faintly, his right hand holding a piece, his left hand brushing the cuff of his right hand. He seemed to be whispering to someone. There was once someone in Dechu who used troops, the more the better. He was unstoppable. In 72 major and minor battles, he did not lose a single one. He placed the piece lightly. The flying sword with a powerful presence fell to the ground 3 zhang away. It was like a huge rock that had smashed into the ground, causing dust to fly. Chao Changqing did not look at the long sword. He only looked at a black piece that jumped out of the box and landed on the chessboard. At the same time, he reached out to pick up a round and cool white piece. He said with a smile, "There was someone in Dachu who wrote poems that were like a bow of 100 stones, a crossbow of 1,000 caddies, like a full moon hanging above the heads of the people." It caused the younger generation to have the thought that they could only kowtow and not speak. It is truly magnificent. When the piece landed, the steels in front of the China Child prison in Great Peace City cracked inch by inch. There's someone in Dachu who talks as if he's possessed by a deity. The chess piece on his wrist is like a fierce general fighting for his life. His spirit is extraordinary. As the chess piece was placed, Chao Zhangqing slightly straightened the root-like white chess piece that had deviated slightly. At the same time, all the crossbow bolts that had been shot at his opponent were blown away by a gust of wind and quickly slid out of their original trajectories. The people of Dachu, the Milky Way is brilliant. There have been fables from various philosophers, teachings from eminent monks, and sermons from enlightened people. Why should the human world envy the heavens? On the chessboard, the black and white go pieces flew down. The old ancestor of the Wu family's sword tomb, Wu Jian, finally made his move. This family's sword path leader, whose family's sword art was the world's sword art, did not descend from the top of the city walls. From the outer city to the imperial city, all the city gates opened at the same time. Then, a thin but extremely long sword chi went from north to south, all the way south. This wisp of sword chi had the momentum of 1,000 riders crashing into each other. After Chai Qingshan attacked, he did not turn his head. After Wu Jian attacked, he still did not turn his head. Chao Changqing said softly, "In the spring and autumn, the wind and rain are turbulent. Some people cry, some hide from the rain under the eaves, some use umbrellas. Only Dachu will not hide from the rain. I would rather die in the rain than live under someone else's roof." The sword chi paused slightly when it was 3 zhang away from Chao Changqing. Then it suddenly exerted force and charged out 2.5 zhang. The sword chi didn't dissipate until it was 20 feet away. When the second sword chi came out of the city, a pillar of light coincidentally hit the head of the old man at the gates of the imperial city. The old master of the Wu family sword tomb raised his hand and shattered it with a wave of his sleeve. His face paled slightly and the ground he was standing on caved in. The old man with his back to the gates of the imperial city slowly walked out of the large hole and stepped out. There was a straight line from the front of him to the imperial road south of Great Peace City. The crack that appeared on the ground was like a long sword. This sword was not more than an inch wide, but it was several li long. In this moment, the sword chi was about to leave the city. Chao Changqing had coincidentally placed a piece closest to the chessboard in front of him. At the beginning of the imperial road inside the city gates, a pillar of light fell down like a long sword cutting a snake. Wu Jian, who had left the city with the sword chi, stood at the gates of the city. He did not have a sword in his hand but made a sword-drawing posture. He shouted, "Chao Changqing. It is not easy to come by, turn back and be saved." Chao Changqing picked up a piece. This time, before he could place it, the piece at his fingertips shattered. A snowy white sword light appeared in the air to his side. Then there was the sound of an enormous collision like the morning bell and evening drum ringing in their ears. Everyone on the city walls and below the city walls widened their eyes. They saw dust fill the air where the indigo-robed person was sitting. It was impossible to see that person's figure. When the dust settled, everyone was on tenterhooks again. Chao Changqing had not died under that sword and continued to remain motionless. The earth where he was sitting had been shaved off several feet, so Chao Changqing was sitting in the air. The black and white pieces on the chessboard did not move at all. The white-haired middle-aged Confucian scholar finally raised his head. He did not look at the sword tomb family master in the northern city gate, but turned his head to the south. He said softly, "You are in this great Chu, whether you live or die, I am also here, always will be here." At this time, almost everyone's heart trembled. A woman in purple stood up from a tall building in Great Peace City. She lightly landed on the Imperial Road. Her body leaned forward slightly and she started to run out of the city. Her form, will, energy, and spirit were all at the peak of the world. Even the Wu family sword tomb old ancestor standing at the end of the Imperial Road had to avoid her. He let her charge out of the city. Chao Changqing placed his piece extremely slowly this time. The purple robe, purple aura, and purple rainbow charged to within 10 feet of Chao Changqing. Xinyuan Qingfeng on the snowy plains of Mount Hui. The purple robe crashed within 10 feet and then stopped. The woman's fingers were like hooks and were only 2 or 3 feet away from Chao Changqing's head. Chao Changqing, who was indifferent to this, leaned forward, one hand holding his sleeve to avoid messing up the chessboard. When this piece landed, the sound was especially crisp. The sound of the piece landing softly sounded on the chessboard. She was sent flying backward, her body tumbling in the air. Xianyuan Qingfeng's back was pressed against the city wall. Her eyes were cold, her elbows pressed against the city wall. Her knees were a mess and blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. The blue-robed Confucian scholar, who had been defeated at some point, sat quietly where he was. He bit his lips and shook his head. The Confucian saint of Dechu, Chao Changqing. He finally said something he had not said for 20 years. This world says that you caused the fall of Dechu. I, Chao Changqing, do not agree. For the first time since he came to the city alone, he raised his hand high and then placed a piece heavily on the chessboard. The clouds tumbled as they descended together. The sky of the Central Plains dropped 100 feet. Chapter 1751. There were countless lofty mountains and precipitous ridges in the southern border. Someone was skimming across the peaks of the mountains. There was always a swift and fierce flying sword following him like a shadow. He suddenly stopped on the branch of a towering tree at the peak of the mountain and looked up. The flying sword also stopped chasing him at the peak of the mountain before him. It hovered in the air and hummed slightly. An average-looking middle-aged man stood near the flying sword. He also looked up at the sky and sighed. Then, he stood on one leg like a golden rooster. He lifted one leg and bent down to take off his hemp shoe and shook it. The man in a scholarly robe who had been chased all the way from Great Peace City to the deep mountains and forests of the southern border laughed and said, "Dong Tai, oh Dong Tai, Chao Changqing is seeking his own death. The Empress of West Chu, Jiangxi, has also left the capital of West Chu. Not long later, even you will be able to feel the collapse of the great pillar of fate of West Chu. At that time, other than Tantai Pingjing, that old woman, who replaced me and stole a part of it, there will only be Chen Jibao and Zhao Zhu who will benefit greatly. As long as Chen Jibao absorbs half of the fate of West Chu, as the most important person supporting the dragon, let's see how you, Dong Tai, will kill me. Not to mention the 4 grandmasters of the martial arts assessment, even among the 14 martial arts assessment masters, the Peach Blossom Sword God, Dong Tai, was definitely the one who did not have the demeanor of an expert. However, it was this average-looking middle-aged uncle who had chased Xia Guanying, the number 1 on the immortal map of land and dynasty, into such a sorry state. Dong Tai put on his shoes and curled his lips. He said unhappily, "Are you saying that after a pure martial artist like me becomes an immortal on land, I will be hurt by fate if I kill someone with fate?" Sorry, back then, there was an old Daoist on Mount Longhu who had returned to simplicity. He was killed by me when he ascended. It's fine. Xia Guanying sneered, "How can I be the same as Wu Lingsu of the Celestial Master Residence?" Dong Tai rolled his eyes. "In my opinion, there's really no difference." Xia Guanying laughed loudly and said, "Then I'll wait and see how your cultivation realm drops." Dong Tai put away his casual expression and said seriously, "I don't care who should follow the will of heaven to suppress who, or who should follow the will of heaven to defeat who, and I don't care who the fate of the world flows to. I don't care about these things. I'm not even interested in becoming an earth immortal, let alone attaining the Tao and ascending." Xia Guanying said angrily, "You lunatic. You are even more unreasonable than Lu Dongxian and Li Chungang. Dong Tai turned his head to look at the flying sword, which was made of ordinary materials. He laughed heartily and said, I, Dong Tai, have the 3-foot sword by my side for the rest of my life. It's enough. Xie Guanyin clearly felt a monstrous murderous aura. It disappeared in a flash, and he fled even faster than before. The mountain under Xie Guanying's feet was flattened by the sword. Dong Tai did not immediately pursue him. He raised his head again and looked at the unusually low clouds. Chao Changqing, oh Chao Changqing, Li Chungang left, Wang Xianji left, and now even you are leaving. Dong Tai suddenly laughed. One man and one sword flew into the sky. They passed through the clouds and arrived above the sea of clouds where the sun shone. Dong Tai stood cross-legged on the flying sword. He raised his head and looked at the golden sun in the sky. Dong Tai was bathed in the golden light. He stood on the flying sword and was lost in thought. In the end, Dong Tai gave a thumbs up to the sky and slowly turned to the ground. Dong Tai said loudly, I, Dong Tai, am already here in this life. In this life, I am already here. What can you do to me? Who dares to ask me, Dong Tai, if I can use my sword? No immortal in the heavens could answer this question. On the ground, Xie Guanying muttered repeatedly, lunatic, lunatic deng. Chao Changqing is a lunatic. You, Dong Tai, are also lunatics. An official wearing a golden embroidered robe walked up to the top of the city wall with a straight face. He was in the prime of his life, just over 40 years old. If it had been during the Yonghui era when the Liang court was stable, he would have been an eye-catching existence. At the age of 40, he had become a second-rank official, the head of the Ministry of Justice. How could he not be proud? His surname was Liu, and his name was Io. He was born as a Jinshi in the 8th year of Yonghui. Compared to Yin Maochuan's famous Yonghui Spring, he was a few years later. Liu Io's talent was not obvious. His family was unknown, and he only had a very poetic name. However, Liu Io's personality was ridiculed by Tai and City as a stubborn rock in the latrine pit. He had been the vice-director of the Ministry of Justice for almost 10 years and sat on the cold bench for almost 10 years. In the end, in the first year of Xiangfu, he was promoted to a doctor. Last year, he was promoted to assistant minister. This spring, in fact, it was only 3 days ago that he was promoted to minister of the Ministry of Justice of Liang. In addition to being in charge of the 4 departments of the Ministry of Justice, he also held the power to kill all the people of Liang in name. He was secretly responsible for the issuance of the embroidered copper fish pouches. The people who followed behind Liu Io to the top of the city wall all had embroidered copper fish pouches hanging from their waists. Among them, there were 36 famous swordsmen, 18 blade masters, and 14 fist masters. The appearance of Liu Io and this group of Jianghu masters was close to 70 people. Immediately, the originally devoid of the aura of spring on the city wall added a bit of the austere aura of autumn. Liu Io was a weak scholar, but even if he stood together with the Wu family's sword tomb elder, Chai Qingshan of the Dongyue sword pool, and Xianyuan Qingfeng of the Great Snow Plateau, his aura was not inferior. Wu Jian stood behind the arrow battlement with his hands behind his back, his expression serious. Chai Qingshan borrowed a second sword, Green Fox, from the young girl Shan Yi. He stood with his sword in hand and closed his eyes to rest. The purple-robed man sat directly on the battlement with his arms crossed and squinted his eyes to look into the distance. Liu Io faced the 3 martial arts grandmasters who were strong enough to look down on nobles and said calmly, "The 68 people of the Ministry of Justice are willing to fight for a chance for the 3 of you. I hope that the 3 of you can cooperate sincerely. We can't let that West Chu Chao Changqing continue to run amok in the capital." Wu Jian was silent. Chai Qingshan nodded slightly. Only Xianyuan Qingfeng sneered and said, "The reason why I acted was because Chao Changqing was worthy of my action. Are you worthy of ordering me around?" Liu Io, who was considered a junior compared to the other leaders of the Ministry of Justice, said expressionlessly, "As long as the Great Snow Plateau of Mount Hui is still in Liang's territory, as long as Jianzhou is still in Liang's territory, I, Liu Io," not waiting for this official to finish speaking, Xianyuan Qingfeng placed his hands on his knees. Chai Qing-shan was standing in front of Lu Iyo at some point. However, there was still a trace of blood on the latter's cheek and some of his hair fell to the ground. Lu Iyo didn't even bother to wipe his wound. He gently pushed Chai Qing-shan away and stared at the beautiful woman who was known for her arrogance. You can kill me, and I can also die. However, as long as you, Xianyuan Qingfeng, appear on the walls of Great Peace City, as long as you stand in my sight, you will have to leave the city to fight. It's not that I, Lu Iyo, am using the banner of the Ministry of Justice to threaten you, and it's not that I, Lu Iyo, am asking for your help. Other than His Majesty the Emperor, there is no one else in this city that I cannot do without. Xianyuan Qingfeng leaned back and tilted his head. For the first time, he looked directly at this young minister. He said mockingly, "You are that poor scholar Lu Iyo from Guangling Path, right? Did I remember your hometown wrongly?" Lu Iyo's eyes were dark. It was unknown whether it was the shrewdness of a high official or the temperament of a scholar, but he did not become angry out of humiliation. He said calmly, "Those who walk different paths cannot work together." Xianyuan Qingfeng smiled. Oh. Standing between Xianyuan Qingfeng and Chai Qing-shan, the old ancestor of the Wu family sword tomb frowned. He reached out a hand and casually grabbed. There was a bang in the air. He turned his head and said sincerely to the purple-clothed woman who killed people at every turn, "Little girl, if you don't change your personality, you won't be able to be number one in the world." For some reason, Xianyuan Qingfeng felt more respect for this old man. He was very cold to Chai Qing-shan of the Dongyue sword pool. After hearing Wu Jian's kind reminder, she did not comment. She turned her head and continued to look outside the city. The qi in her body began to circulate rapidly. Her aura increased dramatically, and her purple clothes fluttered. She sat on the city wall like a unique scenery of the Jianghu. It seemed that no one in the Jianghu understood what this woman was thinking. Why did she suddenly become the patriarch of the Xianyuan family in the Great Snow Plains? Why did she go to the Guangling River to stop Wang Xianji? Why did she challenge the new Prince Liang in Great Peace City? Why did she go out of the city to fight Chao Chongqing today? Perhaps she was like a crazy child who did not grow up without parents. She was unwilling to be reasonable in everything she did. However, her cultivation was too high, and she had risen too quickly. Her opportunities were also too good. Therefore, no one had the qualifications to make her a graceful lady from a respectable family. Xianyuan Qingfeng looked up at the sky. Above her was a sea of clouds. The entire Central Plains were like this. She narrowed her eyes and felt slightly sad. She also liked someone, but she did not know how to let him know. It seemed that she did not dare and was not willing to let him know. Then she would let him remember her name. No matter where he went in the Jianghu, the battlefield, or the court, there would be stories of her deeds in the world. Since he could not be like her father who only liked her mother, then she would rather have nothing. Xianyuan Qingfeng suddenly flew out of the city wall. She did not care about the cooperation of the experts of the Ministry of Justice, nor was she willing to work with Wu Jian and Chai Qing-shan, the two grandmasters of the sword. She came to Great Peace City alone, and she left Great Peace City alone. The purple robe once again charged towards Chao Chongqing. She was impassioned and did not fear death. Even Lu Yi couldn't help but be impressed when he saw this scene. If there was a woman like this in the world would not be lonely. Chao Chongqing's lips curled up. He ignored Xianyuan Qingfeng's charge and smiled slightly. He looked at the chessboard. If you do not know in your dreams, how can you know in your life? A long time later, in the Jianghu where there were only Yu Dilong and Go Yufang, there was actually a promise of 10 years that no one knew about. Chapter 1752. Every 10 years, she would come out of seclusion on time and sit alone on the rooftop of the missing moon tower in the Great Snow Plains. She would wear a purple robe and take out a jar of osmanthus wine from under the osmanthus tree, waiting for someone to fulfill their promise of 10 years. After the third time, it was the fourth time. That day, it was raining heavily, and he did not find her. She failed to fulfill her promise. There was only a jar of osmanthus wine on the rooftop, allowing the rain to beat against it. Outside the window, the rain was heavy and the wind was strong. The woman in purple sat in front of the dressing table. The woman in the bronze mirror already had white hair. It was better not to see her. Her skirt was tied in a small knot. Beside her feet was an umbrella that she had treasured for more than 40 years. She lay on the dressing table and fell asleep. She seemed to be having a beautiful dream. She was smiling. There was an old man who didn't look old. He entered the house without knocking. He put away the wet oil paper umbrella, stood at the door, and asked with a smile, "It's raining heavily outside. A lot of fish are going to drown. Do you want to go take a look?" She slept and did not wake up. Everyone in Great Peace City saw an absurd scene. The woman in purple had clearly crashed into Chao Changqing in West Chu and had clearly passed by him. However, Chao Changqing remained sitting in his original spot, while Xianyuan Qingfeng stood in her original spot a few dozen feet to the south of Chao Changqing like an old monk in meditation. Chao Changqing did not look sideways. He picked up a go piece from the go box and gently placed it down. He turned his head and smiled. "It's time to wake up." Xianyuan Qingfeng, who seemed to have been dreaming for 40 years, suddenly woke up. Her back was to the official in green. She did not know when, but tears had streamed down her face. She did not turn around. She stretched and wiped her face with her hands. Smiling, she said, "It really was a good dream." Hearing this, Chao Changqing smiled and said, "That's good." Just as Xianyuan Qingfeng was hesitating about whether to turn around and thank him, Chao Changqing slowly retracted his gaze and looked back at the go board that already had more than 90 go pieces. He smiled and said, "I'm fine. Just don't learn from me." The heavens and the earth were vast. Jiangnan's Guangling had the cool breeze, bright moon, and great river. Northwest Jiliang had the boundless yellow sand. Let's see everything first before deciding on life and death. Life and death were the most important things in life, especially when one was young. One shouldn't make careless decisions. Life wasn't easy, and death was simple. Between life and death, there is also fate. A person's life has to be more exciting than a plant's autumn. Xianyuan Qingfeng nodded. As long as I, Xianyuan Qingfeng, am alive, I will try my best to reduce the number of deaths among West Chu survivors. Chao Changqing dismissed it with a smile. Xianyuan Qingfeng flashed past. At the end of that big dream, she clearly knew that she didn't wake up, or rather, she was already dead. However, she could see that bastard with the umbrella standing alone at the door. His lips moved slightly, but he couldn't say anything. Xianyuan Qingfeng suddenly threw his head back and laughed loudly. Old bastard. The inexplicable abrupt departure of this purple robe did not delay Lu Yi from ordering the Ministry of Justice to go out of the city to kill the enemy. 68 Jianghu experts that the Ministry of Justice and Zhao Go had gathered from all over Great Peace City left the city together. They were like a flock of birds flying out of the branches. This time, Chao Changqing placed a piece at the corner of the chessboard. Then, he pressed 2 fingers lightly on the piece and pushed it forward. Therefore, between Chao Changqing and Great Peace City, between the north and the south, a turbulent energy like the Guangling River appeared. 68 experts seemed to be crossing the Guangling River during flood season. It was difficult and slow. There were constantly people who used up their energy and fell to the ground. Chai Qingshan held his sword and flashed out. With one sword, he cut apart that great river of energy. Chao Changqing's right hand picked up a piece and placed it on his left hand. He lightly swept it to the right. Instantly, a wave of sword energy surged out from left to right. Chao Changqing then placed a piece from top to bottom on the chessboard. In the air, a particularly majestic and resplendent pillar of light fell straight down from top to bottom. Between heaven and earth, one horizontal and one vertical, 2 waves of sword energy. They attacked Chai Qingshan of the Eastern Yu Sword Pool and Wu Jian of the Wu family sword tomb. Chao Changqing was not in a hurry to pick up a piece. He stared at the chessboard and said to himself, "Chao Changqing, also have the Haoran sword. Chai Qing-shan held half of the broken sword and landed 20 zhang to the north of Chao Changqing. There was a large pool of blood on his chest. Wu Jian stood 100 zhang in front of Chai Qing-shan. The clothing at his shoulder was in tatters. The old man reached out with his right hand. There was a snow-white sword energy that seemed tangible in his hand. He said in a deep voice, "Chao Changqing, you will not hesitate to have your body and soul destroyed to finish this game?" Chao Changqing did not answer. On the city wall, the Minister of War, Lu Yu, pressed his hands against the city wall, his hands trembling. As a poor scholar from the Guangling Taoism, he recognized Chao Changqing. He was not in West Chu, but in Liang, an enemy state of West Chu. He was in this Tai-an city. However, before Chao Changqing and West Chu's Empress Jiangxi came to the capital in the first year of Xiangfu, Lu Yu, who no one cared about in the Ministry of Justice's Yamen, only knew a traveling Confucian scholar he met by chance, knew the scholar who would treat him to a meal of wine every time he entered the capital. Lu Yu couldn't afford a residence, so he could only rent a small, remote courtyard in the capital's southeast. During those years, whenever he saw that smiling middle-aged man in front of his deserted door, Lu Yu would always be pleasantly surprised and happy. In the officialdom, the taciturn Lu Yu liked to complain to this elegant and cultured senior scholar, to this Mr. Chow who he only knew his surname. After he got drunk, he said that his teacher was that Grand Secretary Great One who had students all over the world. He was clearly the top scorer in that year's examination, his essay not losing to the top 3, yet in the end, he was only a jinsher. He felt like it was Grand Secretary Zhang Jiulu who purposely looked down on Guangling scholars, which was why everyone only knew that Bai Yan had students like Yi Mao Chun, Zhao Yuling, Yuan Gua, and the others, not Lu Yu. Meanwhile, Grand Secretary Zhang Jiulu also never considered him his student, let alone the disciple he was proud of. Meanwhile, after that Mr. Chow heard his essay for the examination word for word, he laughed and said that this essay was exactly the same as Bai Yan's when he was young, deeply understanding the essence of avoiding the high and dispersing, avoiding the empty and distant, a good essay. However, it was precisely because of this that Grand Secretary Zhang had you sit on a cold bench for many years like him, that you, Lu Yu, must not be impatient. Afterwards, half of Lu Yu felt relieved, half of it was because he had given up. He knew his place, kept his feet on the ground, burying his head in his work as a small official in the Ministry of Justice. However, what left him completely disheartened was that even when the Grand Secretary's reputation was in tatters, when he risked universal condemnation to pay him a visit, all for the sake of a teacher-student relationship, that Grand Secretary not only refused to meet him, he even had the gatekeeper pass him a message. "Who is Lu Yu? I, Zhang Jiulu, have this type of disciple? I don't remember." That evening, Lu Yu returned to his simple and crude small courtyard, dead drunk. However, after that Grand Secretary died, after he was promoted to Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Qi Yanglong found someone to give him an extremely ordinary scripture, only saying that it was something he accidentally flipped through in someone's house. Lu Yu discovered that there were 2 old examination papers that were already turning yellow inside the book. It was no more than 1,000 words, but there were actually 16 comments totaling more than 500 words. At the end was that sentence, "Good talent comes out of Guangling, can also become a pillar. I should carefully nurture him for the country. When I die, he will be of great use." Lu Yu's eyes were moist. He did his best to keep them open, standing on the city wall, staring fixedly at that green-clothed man. "Mr. Chow, I was born into Chu, I do not dare forget my roots. Therefore, in the future, I will seek peace in the imperial court for the sake of all the West Chu survivors. Mr. Chow, as Zhang Jiulu's student, I do not dare forget your kindness. Therefore, today, I have no choice but to stand here and take you as my enemy." Chao Changqing suddenly turned his head to look at this Minister of Justice who was rapidly rising in Liang's officialdom. He revealed a faint smile, only gratification in his eyes. Nothing needed to be said. Rather than die heroically for one's country and one's surname, it was better to live dishonorably for the common people of the world. Lu Yu scholar, don't learn from me, Chao Changqing. Chao Changqing once again sat upright and still, facing the chessboard, unable to take his eyes off it. Silent and motionless. Heaven and earth resonated. Heaven and man forgot. Chapter 1753. In Tai and City, Sun Yin, the arrogant scholar who had once again found an excuse to ask for leave and not go to the yamen for the roll call, galloped madly out the door. He first found the small bookcase of the imperial astronomer, then pulled the youth with him and rushed straight to the Hanlin Academy. After finding the only 10th Dan of the Liang dynasty, Fan Zhongho, he asked for 2 boxes of chess pieces and picked a room near the window to store miscellaneous items. He pulled Fan Zhongho and the youth's supervisor to squat on the floor and began to review Chao Changqing's game. The supervisor was responsible for explaining where Chao Changqing's pieces were placed. Fan Zhongho followed the order of placing the pieces and at the same time explained the mystery behind them. However, the further they went, especially after 20 moves, whether it was Fan Zhongho or the youth supervisor, they all said that the person who played black first was mediocre. The first 10 moves could be considered passable, but it was also because they were familiar with the exquisite moves of the older generation of West Chu players. According to this person's level, not to mention entering the Liang chessboard to await the imperial decree, even Sun Yin himself would be able to win. Ignoring Sun Yin, who was being mocked and ridiculed, he sank into deep thought. Fan Zhongho grabbed a handful of black and white chess pieces with one hand and was ready to place them down at any time. His other hand held his chin and his brows were tightly furrowed. Sun Yin muttered to himself, Chao Changqing, as the #1 official in the world, is this the last game of his life, just like this? Against such a mediocre player, he was able to tangle endlessly for 100 moves? Fan Zhongho didn't say anything. The youth supervisor sneered, what do you know? Can you see how many moves the black pieces have made? Chao Changqing's opponent was clearly a crappy chess player who only knew how to memorize. He was probably someone who frequently came into contact with West Chu players. From Li Mi, who was known to make West Chu players shout, heaven above, to Wang Qingxin, who was publicly known to only let Li Mi go first, and then to Gu, who lost a piece to Wang Qingxin. All along the way, it could be said that all of the proud moves of the West Chu players had been forcefully used by the black player in this game. Coincidentally, with this hodgepodge of unreasonable moves, the black and white was actually a tie. Therefore, it could be said that Chao Changqing, who was playing white, did this on purpose. Otherwise, who in the world would dare to play Chao Changqing's first move? My grandpa Jian Jing can't, Huang Longsher can't, no one can. Even 1,000 years later, no one could. Sun Yin looked at Fan Zhongho. The latter nodded lightly. Sun Yin slapped his forehead, speechless. Great Peace City was still trembling. After each earthquake, Fan Zhongho would accurately place a piece under the direction of the youth from the imperial astronomer. Fan Zhongho suddenly raised his head and asked, it's about to end. Are you not going to say hello? The youth pretended not to hear and muttered, the mysteries of heaven cannot be revealed. I still want to live a few more years, and leave this city to go out and see. Sun Yin's ears were sharp. Hearing this, he couldn't help but tease, you brat, not only do you have a foul mouth, you're also very slippery. The youth with the nickname Little Bookcase mocked, Little Cat, I don't even want to talk to you. Kid Cat was an unconventional nickname given to Sun Yin by the young man. He tore down the Sun character and translated the Yin character. Fan Zhongho messed up the game and said with a smile, let's not play this game. Mr. Chao's chess skills can only be judged by old supervisor and, in any case, only 2 people can comment. As to how Mr. Chao is outside of chess, it's not something we can comment on. Sun Yin stared at the youth who was not wearing the robes of an official but was dressed in white. The latter hesitated and glanced outside the window. In the end, he said, the Zhao family of Liang has lost much of their destiny. If not for this, I would have gone to complain to Sister Empress long ago. Looking at the situation, that Chao Changqing is showing signs of losing all of his destiny to Guangling Path. So boring. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have revived the country. Sun Yin's eyes suddenly turned red as he shouted angrily, "Shut up." Fan Zhongho sighed softly and said, "Little bookcase, don't say any more." The youth became angry and left with a wave of his sleeve. Sun Yin squatted there, his chin on his folded arm. He said to himself, Chao Changqing wants to let Li Yang know that, whoever wins Guangling wins the world. Fan Zhongho nodded. It's a good thing. Guangling Path will have fewer deaths. Sun Yin said with a wooden expression, feelings naturally can't be eaten as rice. But without feelings, it's like cooking without seasoning. Every meal is plain white rice with tasteless vegetables. Over time, there really won't be anything to chew. Some tastes can make your eyes fill with tears, make your teeth chatter, and make your liver and gallbladder break. This is probably feelings. Fan Zhongho silently began to pack up the chess pieces. Sun Yin asked, "Why do you mock those who have feelings?" Fan Zhongho thought for a moment. People who are too smart don't like to have feelings. People who are too simple and stupid can't have feelings. That's why both don't like this thing. Sun Yin grinned. I should be the former. Fan Zhongho slowly put the chess pieces back into the box. He smiled. I should be the latter. Sun Yin's eyes suddenly became as sharp as knives. Then Huang Longshi? Fan Zhongho's expression was normal as he asked in response, then Su Fengnian? The two smiled at each other. They did not overdo it. They were light. The sky shook and the earth shook. This time, the shaking was especially intense. The two people in the room fell to the ground at the same time and then felt suffocated. Dust poured down from the roof beams. Sun Yin lay on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. Fan Zhongho continued to pack up the chess pieces. Outside Great Peace City, in front of Chao Changqing, in the black and white chess boxes, there was only one chess piece left. Wu Jian of the Wu family sword tomb and Chai Qing Shan of the Dongyue sword pool could not break through that one zhang of distance. Chao Changqing remained calm. Great Peace City was shaken again and again. There was no one in the cavalry outside the city who could ride on horseback. How could they charge and kill? The archers outside the city had spasming arms. There were no arrows in their quiver, so how could they rain arrows? Chai Qing Shan was bathed in blood even though that indigo robe had not intentionally attacked him. Wu Jian's palm was a bloody mess and white bone could be seen. Chai Qing Shan spat out a mouthful of blood and grimaced. First, I saw Su Fengnian receive that sword, and then I saw you, Chao Changqing, being as immovable as a mountain. This life is almost over. Chao Changqing, if you get up and enter the city now, I cannot stop you. I will not block the way here. Chai Qing Shan turned and slowly walked back to the city gates. His back was bent and he looked old. Wu Jian, who had been standing between Chao Zhangqing and the city gate, made way for him. He sighed and said, although I still have the strength for one sword strike, I definitely won't be able to block it. My Wu family's sword tomb has been extremely benevolent to the Central Plains. It's time to stand aside and watch. After all, if we keep the last bit of power, it may be useful in the future. As Chao Changqing stopped playing chess, heaven and earth fell silent. Chao Changqing smiled as he looked across. The last black chess piece finally jumped out of the box. It seemed that the person holding the black chess piece was somewhat hesitant. It swayed back and forth, unwilling to land. Or it could be said that it did not know where to land. Chao Changqing leaned forward slightly. He held the chess piece with 2 fingers on one hand and extended a finger with the other to point at a certain spot on the chessboard. He said softly, you might as well place it here. Sure enough, the black stone landed on that spot. Chao Changqing put down the hand holding the chess piece. He smiled but did not say anything, as if he had admitted defeat. More than 200 black and white chess pieces hovered in the air. Chao Changqing closed his eyes. You won. But I, Chao Changqing, never felt that I had lost. This game of chess was the proudest game of my life, Chao Changqing. The corners of Chao Changqing's mouth curled up slightly. He suddenly waved the sleeve of the hand holding the chess piece. The chess piece went from south to north. After entering the city, it charged along the long imperial road, smashing through the gates of the imperial city, the gates of the palace, and the gates of the Hall of Martial Heroes. Only when it smashed through the dragon throne that the previous emperors of Liang had sat on did the chess piece turn to dust. Chao Changqing opened his eyes. His face was covered in tears, but there was no sorrow on his face. He slowly extended a hand in front of him. It was only at this moment that the old green robe was soaked in fresh blood. A cool breeze blew through the world. It blew away the stench of blood, and also blew away the wind. Chao Changqing's fingers began to dissipate. Then his arm, and then his body. The black and white chess pieces also vanished. In the end, that blue robe could no longer be seen outside Great Peace City. There was no more Chao Guanzi in the world. Chapter 1754. The rain was the worst during the Qingming festival. On the Beiliang Post House Road in the drizzle, large groups of Yuzhou cavalry were constantly rushing to the Liangzhou Pass. In addition, the cavalry troops in Liangzhou who had come to reinforce Qingsang City had yet to return to their station, which meant that almost all the main forces of Beiliang, especially the cavalry, had surfaced and become the absolute main force in the next battle of Liangmang. It would evolve from a siege battle to an unprecedented large-scale cavalry battle. In the fierce collision between the nomadic civilization in the north and the agricultural civilization in the Central Plains, one was active and the other was passive. The former relied on the advantage of the number of warhorses to invade the pass, while the latter relied on the crossbows in the city to defend. In history, countless cities outside the Great Wall and near the border had been submerged in the tide of cavalry. In the sound of horse hooves in the north, the words "isolated city" and "slaughtered city" followed closely. As a result, in the past 20 years, countless civil officials would secretly daydream in the imperial court, thinking that if the two elite cavalry troops of Liang, hundreds of thousands of Beiliang cavalry troops and nearly 100,000 border cavalry troops of the two Liao provinces, could sincerely cooperate to fight against the enemy and compete with the Beimang barbarians on horseback, what a magnificent scene it would be. In Yanji County, which bordered Yuzhou and Liangzhou, on a muddy road, two horses stopped at a fork to make way for a caravan of merchants. The young man was wearing a green robe, with a cold saber hanging from his waist, and his mount was one of the few warhorses in the Yuzhou army. The woman in white was carrying a long cotton bag on her back and a saber hanging from her waist. The young man stopped his horse to make way for the caravan, and the woman of the same age next to him was as beautiful as a fairy. This made the head of the guards in the caravan, who was in charge of clearing the way, tremble in his heart. He hurriedly told his subordinates to pass a message to the arrogant guys in the caravan behind him, who were used to speaking dirty words, telling them not to be unscrupulous just because they had some connections with the Beiliang frontier army. A young man who dared to openly hang a new cold saber on himself was definitely not someone that the second or third-rate members of the Fish Dragon gang could provoke. Perhaps it was because of the leader's warning that although the caravan guards' eyes were burning, none of them dared to flirt with the woman or whistled at her. The caravan slowly moved forward. Suddenly, a rider turned around and galloped over. The handsome young knight stopped his horse a dozen steps away from the man and woman. With a bright smile, he cupped his fists and said to the woman in white, "I'm Chen Jinjai from the Fish Dragon gang. May I know your name, miss?" "Don't worry, miss, I don't have any evil intentions. It's just that I couldn't stand the instigation of my friends. They made a bet with me that I definitely wouldn't be able to find out Mrs. name. If they lost, they would have to treat me to green ant wine for half a year." The handsome young man from the Fish Dragons grinned and said considerately, "Miss, if it's inconvenient for you to tell me your name, just name it." Unfortunately, even though Chen Jianzhai took a step back, the woman was still indifferent. She looked at him calmly, without the shyness of an ordinary girl from the Central Plains facing a lecher, or the anger of a Beiliang girl facing a foreign playboy. In the drizzle, Chen Jianzhai, whose hair was slightly wet, smiled brightly and had no intention of backing down. The young man with a saber who was deliberately ignored by Chen Jianzhai said with a smile, "Her name is Jiang Cabbage, cabbage as in Chinese cabbage." The beautiful woman who was called Cabbage by her companion glared at him and said angrily, "You're Su Jizi, persimmon as in rotten persimmon." Chen Jianzhai, who was now a little famous in the fish dragon gang, was a little hurt. He thought to himself, you two seem to be competing with each other, but in the eyes of a bachelor like me, it's more excessive than flirting. The young man who was called a rotten persimmon asked with a smile, I heard that your gang's leader, Lu Narong, is going to give up her position to someone else? Chen Jinzhai's face suddenly became a little dignified. He finally faced the guy who dared to hang a saber without permission. The Fish Dragon Gang, the Fish Dragon Gang, the name was really far-sighted. It was more complicated than all the other 9 sects and gangs in Liang. It gathered nearly 20,000 people in the Jianghu, a behemoth in terms of numbers. Everyone in the Fish Dragon Gang was well aware of it. If the Fish Dragon Gang was not a puppet personally supported by a big shot in Beiliang, it would never have expanded to such an extent today. However, the elders of the Fish Dragon Gang who had followed the old leader to fight for the Jianghu had all retired, and the people in charge had changed. Therefore, there were all kinds of inside stories about the Fish Dragon Gang. Some said that the former Lingzhou provincial governor, Su Beiji, had promoted the originally unknown maid of the Fish Dragon Gang to be the empress of Beiliang's Wulin. Some said that the former local emperor of Lingzhou, the former Huaihua general Zhong Hongwu, had tried to collude with the forces of the Jianghu, but the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, Lu Narong, had turned against him. She had climbed up Mount Qingliang and used the old general's head as a sign of her allegiance. Nowadays, there were even rumors that Lu Nai Rong was actually a private pet of Wudong Courtyard. The implication was that Lu Nai Rong did not have the qualifications to preside over the future of 20,000 men and horses. A large faction could flirt with the government, but she absolutely could not marry into a high family and become a concubine. Therefore, the undercurrent was surging. It was under these circumstances that the news of Lu Nai Rong's resignation as the gang leader spread. Chen Jianzhai, as a rising star of the 4th batch to join the Fish Dragon Gang, had complicated feelings about this matter. Deep down, he admired the way Lu Narong treated people, but he also didn't want the Fish Dragon Gang to have too much to do with the government and the border army. The Jianghu was the Jianghu, and the people of the Jianghu would do what the Jianghu did. Otherwise, in the Second Battle of Liangmang, once the war outside the Great Pass was in an emergency, the more than 20,000 people of the Fish Dragon Gang would have to fight for their lives outside the Great Pass. Putting their lives on the line was something that small gangs would do when they had no territory and no money. Now, the Fish Dragon Gang was deeply rooted in Beiliang and vaguely had the momentum of a military town. Moreover, it was located in Lingzhou, which was far away from the border and had a relatively weak garrison. Chen Jianzhai believed that there would be many people who were active in the Fish Dragon Gang. Chapter 1755. Chen Jianzhai's long silence made the man with the saber laugh. He no longer had the patience to continue waiting. He turned his head and told the woman to go. He squeezed the horse's belly and the two of them rode past Chen Jianzhai. Chen Jianzhai did not stop them from leaving. He slowly turned his horse around and stared at the two figures who were heading into Liangzhou. They were Su Fengnian and Jiang Enai, who had just entered Yuzhou from outside Jibei Pass. Jiang Enai glanced at Su Fengnian without showing any expression. There were many versions of the Fish Dragon Gang's sudden appearance in the Jianghu of the Central Plains. She knew that when he went to Beimang, he seemed to have come out with a group of Fish Dragon Gang members. Su Fengnian, who had guessed her thoughts, smiled and said, "When I was young, I didn't have to worry about life and death. When I was younger, I often heard my mother telling me that the girls in the world were cute and pitiful, and that I should take care of them. So, I always thought, why wouldn't I like such a good girl? If I could have her, why wouldn't I? In the past, I really liked to collect the ancient people's rare calligraphy. For example, I spent a lot of money to collect the Tenli Spring Breeze calligraphy, Heavy Rain Relieving the Summer Heat calligraphy, High Branch Autumn Cicada calligraphy, and Early Clear Snow calligraphy, this set of calligraphy of the 4 seasons. Even the Frost Descends calligraphy, this set of calligraphy of the 24 solar terms, was only 3 short. At that time, I only cared about liking the women I liked, and they had to like me. I hoped that they would be like those precious and exclusive copybooks, all in my wudong courtyard. That way, the copybooks could be preserved well, without wind, rain, and insects, and the women could live without worries, without being homeless. Jiang and I clicked her tongue and said, I think Gu Jiantang was secretly happy when he wanted to help you become the emperor. Once you become the emperor, you will be able to have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. The officials will cry and beg for help in finding concubines, and then they will say that this is inappropriate and happily accept it. What 4 seasons and 20 solar terms posts? Even 100 posts are too few. It was rare that Su Fengnian did not argue with her. He raised his head and squinted his eyes, as if he was feeling the coolness of the hazy drizzle. He said to himself, later, I found that all the women in the world who are worthy of my affection can live well without me. Perhaps they can even live better without me. No matter how chaotic the world outside Wudong Courtyard was, it was not necessarily worse than that small courtyard with no wind or rain and walls on all sides. How could the notes of those inanimate objects? How could he confine them to Wudong Courtyard or Qingliang Mountain like a pavilion? Tide Hark is big, but Jianghu is even bigger. It was only later that I realized that if I could start over again, I would probably still like them in my heart, but I definitely wouldn't flirt with them anymore. For example, Xianyuan Qingfeng of the Great Snow Plains was living a carefree life. Yu Yue was also living a carefree life as teacher Ji Shang in Shangyin Academy. But there are some people I do not regret. For example, I brought Qin Yu to Beiliang and saved Zhao Fengya from Graydon City. I did not have any bad thoughts about them. I just wanted them to live for themselves. Jiang and I said angrily, you are right. But I know that I can't outtalk you. Su Fengnian quickly changed the topic. He sighed, if your chessmen waiting for the imperial edict could have held real power in Dechu's army earlier, instead of staying in a corner south of Guangling River, my father might not have been able to win the Battle of the Western Wall. At that time, both sides were fighting to see whose last breath was gone first. If Chao Chongqing took over Yi Baikui's position, Dechu's last breath would still be there. This time, my master, Chao Zhongqing, and you were the reason why I was able to come to an agreement with Wang Sui and finally connect the entire Liao, northern Ji, northern Liang, and western regions together. The 3 of you have contributed greatly. Under this situation, Jiaodong Prince Zhao Sui, Huai Jidushi Kai Nan, Administrator Han Lin, and Ji Zhou's Deputy General Han Fang will also become important figures. Of course, there are also Yu Wandao, Ko Jianghui, Xie Shibian, Su Huang, and other foreigners from Beiliang. As for the Fish Dragon Gang, maybe they will play a role in the future. But if the battle reaches the point where the Fish Dragon Gang needs to go to the battlefield after the young adults in Liuzhou, it means that both sides in Liangmang have suffered great losses. Jiang and I did not have time to mourn the death of his chessmen waiting for the imperial edict. He said worriedly, there are so many barbarians in Beimang. Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. Yes, there are many. But it's not like I don't have a backup plan in Beimang. Just you wait. As long as Beimang can't take Beilu City in one go, I can set their backyard on fire. As a result, Jiang and I asked an irrelevant question. That Qinyu, is she very beautiful? Su Fengnian grimaced and pretended to be stupid. He did not answer this question. Some words were wrong the moment you opened your mouth. The more you spoke, the more mistakes you would make. Jiang and I seemed to be talking to himself. How beautiful is this woman who was called a beauty by Yan Ji, who was hiding a mistress in a golden house. If I have the chance, I must pay my respects to her. Alas, I'm afraid I'll feel ashamed when the time comes. Su Fengnian suddenly turned his head and said, although I know this request is too much and you won't be happy when you hear it, I still have to say it. If one day I'm not here, you take them away from Beiliang. The farther the better. Jiang Mi's face was full of anger. He said bluntly, I can't do it. This answer was completely within Su Fengnian's expectations. As a result, he did not show any strange expression. Su Fengnian rubbed his stubbled chin and said self-mockingly, when I think about how if I die on the battlefield, I won't be able to see you guys again, I feel very depressed. After teasing, Su Fengnian's expression gradually became serious. Wherever there were shining spears and armored horses, there would inevitably be corpses. After this year's spring, at most there would be a relatively peaceful summer. When the autumn wind gradually rose, there would probably be people dying outside Liangzhou Pass and all of Liuzhou. It would be too late to collect the corpses. Of the 4 grandmasters of martial arts, apart from the carefree peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, West Chu had Chao Changqing, Beimang had Tuoba Bodhisattva, and Bailiang had Su Fengnian. The last 3 were all people who would die if they lost a great battle. At this time, Su Fengnian heard the little mud man say something that he would never have thought of even if he cracked his head. Her words were not very auspicious, but her tone was very resolute. If that day really comes, then wherever Su Fengnian's corpse is, I will stand there. Chapter 1756. Su Fengnian went back to Mount Qingliang alone. Jiang and I went to Mount Wudong, saying that he missed the vegetable garden there and that it would be too late if he didn't plant something while there was still some spring rain. Su Weisheng probably thought that Su Fengnian would go to North Resisting Town outside Liangzhou Pass, so she specially asked Fu Shui Room to send him a letter from home. The meaning was very simple and clear. No matter how urgent the military affairs outside the pass were, Su Fengnian had to go back to Mount Qingliang first. This matter was non-negotiable. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this. Of course, he understood his second sister's good intentions. She was afraid that because he had mustered so many people to bring back the little clay figurine, he would have a guilty conscience and not dare to see Wudong Courtyard's Lu Qingyan, the official consort of Northern Liang Path. In fact, Su Fengnian didn't have the idea of hiding from debt. Some things would be a knot in his heart if he didn't talk about it. If he talked about it, there would be a scar in his heart. There was no distinction between good and bad. However, when Su Fengnian left Bailiang, he had already thought about how to face Lu Qingyan. He didn't say that Lu Qingyan would be Bailiang's princess consort in the future. When Su Fengnian walked out of the Wudong Courtyard with her and arrived at the pavilion in the middle of Tidehark Lake, when she heard those 3 words, her smile was tranquil as she gently tossed a handful of bait into the lake. Then Su Fengnian, the young king who wasn't afraid of Wang Xianji, the king of Liang, the army of Beimang, and the fearless man who even dared to kill immortals, sat beside her a little uneasily. Lu Qingyan didn't say anything, and he didn't know what to say. The 2 young tiger kuei desperately rubbed against him. Su Fengnian glared at them fiercely. The 2 poor, little guys, were immediately scared and ran out of the pavilion. However, they didn't want to leave, so they could only lie under the stairs and lazily bask in the sun, waiting for their master to change his mind. Fortunately, the steward of the prince's mansion, Song Yu, helped the king of Bailiang out by saying that the deputy administrator, Song Dongming, had something important to discuss with him. Su Fengnian felt relieved and took his leave. Lu Qingyan stood up to send him off. She softly said, "Your Highness, you should write another spring festival couplet and have someone send it to Mount Wudong. In the future, don't say sorry, it's really not necessary." Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. Then he smiled. This was probably the taste of a family. He insisted on sending her back to Wutongan first. Along the way, he casually asked his father-in-law about Lu Dongjiang. Lu Qingyan seemed to have gotten over it. Towards the new provincial governor of Liangzhou, who had broken off their father-daughter relationship with her, there was neither deliberate alienation nor excessive closeness in her words. Su Fengnian didn't know how to explain it, mainly because he was afraid that he would paint a snake with legs and draw legs. It was difficult for an upright official to resolve family disputes because the scale of reason and affection were too difficult to grasp. Logically speaking, the Su family took care of the Lu family in all aspects. However, it was obvious that the Lu family still felt that the in-laws didn't do enough. They never thought that the family's unacclimatized situation in Bailiang was their own fault. Instead, they thought that the support from Mount Qingliang was not enough, and that Lu Qingyan didn't give him enough pillow talk. After sending Lu Qingyan back to Wutongan, Su Fengnian looked at the slender and weak back. He hesitated for a moment and finally made up his mind. Then he followed Song Yu to Song Dongming's government office, which was located halfway up the mountain. Unexpectedly, Song Dongming stood at the door to greet them. After Su Fengnian and the deputy administrator of Beiliang took their seats in the government office, Song Dongming told them the reason without waiting for the officials to serve them tea. It turned out that after Lu Dongjiang was promoted to the governor of Liangzhou, he promoted more than a dozen children of the Lu family to the provincial governor's mansion. Moreover, some of the appointments were related to the fourth-grade official position. They should have been approved by the governor's mansion before they could take effect. However, it seemed that Governor Lu wanted to act first and report later. To be honest, Song Dongming did not nod or shake his head about the resignation of the former governor of Liangzhou, Tian Peifong, and the filling of the vacancy by Lu Dongjiang. If he were an ordinary official, he would have roughly figured out Deputy Administrator Song's bottom line. Su Fengnian was silent. In the final analysis, the crux of the problem was not the Liangzhou officialdom, which had just changed parents, or even Lu Qingyan and Lu Dongjiang. It was Su Fengnian himself. In the past 2 years, he did not have a good impression of the Lu family. However, when he did not make a clear statement on many things, no one in Beiliang could understand his thoughts. Therefore, they could only tolerate and compromise. Especially when they recruited the children of the Lu family to be officials with real power in Beicheng, the officialdom of Beiliang naturally did not dare to underestimate the Lu family. Especially when Lu Dongjiang was unexpectedly promoted, it undoubtedly fueled the arrogance of the Lu family. Song Dongming's expression was calm, but he could not help but feel a little depressed. Originally, he wanted to make friends with Lu Dongjiang. He did not expect that this famous scholar of Qingzhou, who was famous in the Central Plains, would be so insatiable that he might disrupt the situation in Liangzhou. Song Dongming knew that Bai Yu was against Lu Dongjiang's appointment as the provincial governor of Liangzhou. Therefore, Lu Dongjiang's action was tantamount to a silent slap to Song Dongming's face. Presumably, Bai Yu was watching the fire burn across the river. Su Fengnian sighed and did not say much to Song Dongming. He only said that the 3 appointments were temporarily put aside at the administrator's manor. He would personally go to the Liangzhou provincial governor's manor. Then, Su Fengnian changed the topic. He said with a smile that Administrator Li Gongda had also submitted his resignation, only keeping the post of northern supervisor. Then, Li Gongda recommended Song Dongming to be the second administrator in Beiliang's history. Song Dongming did not agree. He only said that Beiliang still needed Li Gongda, an experienced and reputable local official, to be the administrator. Otherwise, now that the provincial governors of Liangling and Yulu had been replaced by foreigners, if Song Dongming were to be promoted to administrator, it would be one disaster after another. It was inevitable that the local scholars of Beiliang would resent him. Su Fengnian did not press the issue. He only said that Song Dongming should think it over. After leaving the Yamen, Su Fengnian went to the Liangzhou provincial governor's manor with a light carriage and a simple entourage. Sitting in the carriage, Su Fengnian's fingers unconsciously stroked the jade pendant with a dragon's tail hanging from his waist. It was not strange that Song Dongming would give up the position of administrator. Bai Yu, who had arrived in Beiliang later than Song Dongming, was now in a low position in Mount Qingliang. This Mr. White Lotus did not have a prominent official status, but he had gathered a group of like-minded young talents around him. Bai Yu only lacked a status. Once Song Dongming vacated the position of deputy administrator, there was no doubt that Bai Yu would take it. Obviously, in Song Dongming's eyes, the position of deputy administrator was like a dangerous pass. He could not give it to Bai Yu, who was eyeing it covetously. Otherwise, Bai Yu, who was justified, would truly rise in Beiliang's officialdom. Song Dongming was determined to sit in the position of deputy administrator for another 2 or 3 years. At that time, as long as the Battle of Liangmang came to an end, Beiliang's civil and military officials would reward him based on his contributions. Bai Yu, who did not have enough status, would not be a threat to him in the future. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. He had no intention of exposing Song Dongming's dark thoughts. In fact, this was a good thing. It meant that Song Dongming was showing signs of taking root in Beiliang. As for whether he would treat Bai Yu unfairly, Su Fengnian did not care. Speaking of which, if Song Dongming could really provoke Bai Yu's competitive spirit, it would be a great thing for Beiliang. Chapter 1757. When Su Fengnian's figure appeared outside the gate of the provincial governor's mansion, the officials were scared witless. They hurriedly opened the gate to welcome the king of Bailiang. Su Fengnian walked in quickly. Soon, he saw 20 to 30 officials from the provincial governor's mansion surrounding Lu Dongjiang, who was wearing a purple robe. Su Fengnian dismissed them with a smile. According to the law, the provincial governor of Liang was a grade 3 official. His official patch should be embroidered peacock. However, the provincial governor of Liangzhou of Bailiang had always been half a grade higher than that of Yuzhou and Lingzhou, which was a grade 2 official. This had long been reported and filed by the Ministry of Personnel of the Liang Imperial Court. However, none of the provincial governors of Liangzhou of Bailiang dared to openly wear the official robe embroidered with a grade 2 golden pheasant. This was the rule of the Liang officialdom. Therefore, there was an insurmountable gap between the purple-robed official robe and the red-robed official robe. In the Grand Peace City, taking the minister of Shangshu province as an example, the minister of the 6 ministries was a grade 2 official. However, most of the left and right assistant ministers of the 6 ministries were grade 3 officials and were still not allowed to wear the purple robe. During the reign of Yonghui, only the left assistant ministers of the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Army were grade 2 officials. After the Xiangfu incident, not only were the right assistant ministers of the 2 ministries promoted to grade 2, even the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights promoted to grade 2 this year. Lu Dongjiang could be regarded as the first provincial governor of Bailiang to wear the purple robe official robe. He was also one of the few high-grade provincial governors in the territory of Liang. If Su Fengnian remembered correctly, in today's world, only the top officials of Liangzhou of Bailiang, Qingzhou of Jinggan, Tengzhou of Nanjiang, and Yuezhou of the southern border of the capital region were grade 2 officials. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that Lu Dongjiang was the third person of the civil officials of Bailiang, only under the Minister of War and the Deputy Minister of War. The sudden meeting was full of laughter and joy. Whether it was the old faces in the Liangzhou provincial governor's office or the dozen new faces with the surname Lu, they were all relieved to see the young vassal king with a gentle smile. If Great Peace City was the foot of the Zhao family, then Liangzhou was the door of the Su family. The position of provincial governor of Liangzhou had been vacant for many years. The position of provincial governor of Liangzhou was actually equivalent to provincial governor. The position of general of Liangzhou had always been held by the protector general of Bailiang. After Tian Peifang was promoted from provincial governor of Yuzhou to provincial governor of Liangzhou, she did not make any changes. She advocated non-interference governance. Lu Dongjiang changed the previous position and pushed out dozens of Lu family members at once. In addition, Shi Fu, who had been silent for many years, became the general of Liangzhou. Fortunately, after the Wang Ye's conversation today, both the new and old officials of the provincial governor's manor expressed his affirmation. He named 7 or 8 people and praised them. He had high hopes for the new people and had an appreciative attitude towards the old people. As for the 2 sides that were at daggers drawn, there was no stick, only dates, and there was no favoritism. This made the old people of the provincial governor's manor shed tears of gratitude. They were really worried that after Lu Dongjiang became the head of the manor, it would not be enough to stuff a dozen people of the Lu family into the manor. He would not stop until they were all on the cold bench. Once the Wang Ye tacitly approved of this, then even the gods would not be able to save their official careers. For some reason, after seeing the king with their own eyes today, they were angry at the Lu family. As a result, the old officials of the provincial governor's office, who also had a lot of silent criticism of Mount Qingliang, suddenly felt their anger vanish. It was probably because the young king's appearance as he sat on the chair and talked cheerfully and wittily made people involuntarily revere him. In the end, Su Fengnian had a private chat with his father-in-law, Lu Dongjiang. Outsiders did not know what the young king said, but they only saw that the provincial governor's face, which was full of smiles, was becoming more and more radiant. Afterwards, Lu Dongjiang took the initiative to retract a few of the illegal orders and comforted the clansmen. He promised that in less than 3 years, each of them would have great wealth. Not only that, for the first time, Lu Dongjiang sternly warned everyone that they had to be more restrained in this period of time and not bring disgrace to the Lu family's reputation. Other than giving the clan a reassurance, Lu Dongjiang also removed 3 members of the Lu family from the genealogy overnight. From that moment on, Lu Dongjiang finally had some of the air of the head of the Lu family. When Bai Yu drunkenly walked out of a secluded mansion, he suddenly saw a carriage lift the curtain. He paused and then strode over. Getting on the carriage, he sat in the carriage. Facing the young man, Sir White Lotus was calm and composed. Su Fengnian, who had come to Beiliang's deputy provincial governor's mansion to pick him up, joked, "Sir White Lotus, are you not afraid of provoking public anger?" Because of his eyesight problem, Bai Yu habitually squinted to look at people. He smiled and said, "I can't do anything to the hot stove, but Prince won't allow me to do anything to the cold stove?" Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily and changed the topic. Li Gongda said that he wants to resign from the position of administrator, and Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei also wants to enter the border army. Does Sir White Lotus have any thoughts? If you do, you can say it directly. Bai Yu was not afraid and said directly, "Prince, tell me your thoughts first," and of course, Deputy Administrator Song's thoughts. Su Fengnian also said bluntly, "My original intention was to let Sir Song be promoted to administrator and you fill in the position of deputy administrator. But Sir Song said that there are already too many foreign provincial governors in Beiliang, so there should not be another administrator." Bai Yu leaned lazily against the wall of the carriage and sneered, "Oh? That's simple. After Administrator Li resigns, Sir Song will be his official administrator, and the new provincial governor of Liangzhou, Lu Dongjiang, will be the deputy administrator. Then, Lingzhou's Song Yan, who is from Beiliang, will be the provincial governor of Yuzhou. As for the provincial governor of Liangzhou..." At this point, Bai Yu extended his finger and pointed at himself. "If not me, then who?" Su Fengnian was silent. Bai Yu smiled and said, "Beiliang's arrangement is to make things difficult for Sir Song. But if I ask for a smaller position and run to Yuzhou to be the provincial governor and no longer be an official under Sir Song's eyes, it will make things difficult for Prince." Bai Yu stopped smiling. "In fact, the most suitable candidate to be the provincial governor of Liangzhou is not me, but the former provincial governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji. Rest assured, Prince, no matter what, I will not be the deputy administrator or the provincial governor." Su Fengnian was puzzled. "Then what will Sir do?" Bai Yu raised a corner of the curtain and hung it on the hook. A cool breeze blew against his face and brought some coolness to the carriage. Bai Yu sighed. "The key is not what I think, but how bold Prince is." Su Fengnian was even more puzzled. "Sir, what do you mean?" Bai Yu said in a low voice, "Beiliang's land is narrow and is old history. Right now, it has the vast western regions, including the 4th province, Liuzhou. Adding on a 5th province outside Liangzhou, with Fengbei City as the fulcrum, it will be enough to accomplish great things." Su Fengnian's heart trembled. He said calmly, "The imperial court will not agree to Beiliang occupying 5 provinces." Bai Yu smiled. "Now that things have come to this, do we still need the imperial court to agree? I inadvertently saw some hastily changed border army deployments. Yuzhou, which was originally destined to be a spectator in the Second Battle of Liangmang, suddenly became important again. Why? Dare I ask the 2 Huais Kai, Nan, Han Lin, the northern Mangs Wang Sui, and the 2 Liaos Gu Jiantang, how many of these 3 groups of people did Wang Yes see when he led his troops out of the border? How many people did you negotiate with? And how many people did Prince negotiate with in the north and south of Beimang?" The string of questions caused Su Fengnian's expression to change slightly. Bai Yu did not expect to get an answer. He seemed to be talking to himself. "A certain person is the emperor. I, Bai Yu, will be an official no matter where I am. It is all good." Su Fengnian did not answer the question. "Our scholars in Beiliang want to be an official, and they want it so righteously. I am very happy." Bai Yu's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the still blurry face and smiled slightly. "If Prince wants all the scholars in the world to not have to bow and scrape, I will be happy. I am also very happy." Su Fengnian said emotionally, "I am afraid the people of the world will not be happy." Bai Yu sneered and said, just one family will not be happy. Su Fengnian was shocked. Bai Yu said, maybe Prince will find it strange why I, Bai Yu, have changed my mind. It is actually very simple. I recently understood something. A certain person may be the emperor for 30 to 40 years, at most 50 to 60 years. But it may be enough for the world to have 200 years of peace and good weather. It is very impressive. Su Fengnian looked at this elegant scholar in white robes. Just like when Su Xiao saw Zhao Chongling in the past. Both of them wanted to support the dragon. Chapter 1758. Su Fengnian had an additional, nameless, young attendant by his side. He rode a horse and wore armor, but he did not carry a cold saber or crossbow. He was serious in speech and manner and had a lot on his mind. Su Fengnian traveled all the way to the north. He did not deliberately win over this talented young man. It was not that he did not want to, but it was meaningless. Whether Su Fengnian talked to him about the national interest or high official position and generous salary, it all seemed ridiculous and comical. This was because his name was Xie Shibian, Chao Changqing's favorite disciple. He was one of the twin jade annulus of Dechu who stood out during the Guangling Taoist War. Most of the students of Dechu were now placed in the major academies of Lingzhou, far away from the troublesome places. Only Xie Shibian proposed to go to Bailiang Pass to take a look. Of course, Su Fengnian would not refuse. He now somewhat understood the mentality of the late emperor of Liang, Zhao Dun, and Chen Jibao. Some people, even if they could not be used, as long as they were by his side, they would be like a devastatingly beautiful woman standing in front of his eyes, equally pleasing to the eye. And to be fair, compared to Ko Jianghuai, who was unruly and unbridled, the gentle, respectful, and thrifty Xie Shibian made Su Fengnian feel more at ease. Getting along with Ko Jianghuai was like drinking a large bowl of strong wine. It was delightful, but he had to worry about whether or not he would get drunk. Getting along with Xie Shibian was like drinking a small cup of tea. It did not hurt his stomach, and he did not have a headache. Along the way, Su Fengnian would only greet Xie Shibian when he received a spy report from the Fushui Fang. The spy reports were mostly from the higher-ups of the Liang imperial court. After Xie Shibian finished reading them, he kept them one by one. Every time he received a piece of paper, it often meant that Dechu had lost a battle line, or that several cities had fallen. Xie Shibian only became more and more taciturn, and there was no obvious change in his expression. One by one, familiar generals of Dechu were beheaded and became the military exploits of Liang's leading generals. One by one, familiar names chose to surrender to Liang. The territory that Dechu controlled became smaller and smaller. Wu Zhongshuan, Lu Xingxiang, Song Li, and even Su Gong and Yuan Tingshan appeared more and more in the court reports. Dechu's power was gone, and this was undoubtedly the end. The last court report was to inform the world that the emperor of Liang would personally lead the army to the West Chu rampart in the beginning of summer. At the same time, he issued an edict that as long as the rebel armies of Dechu gave up resistance, the imperial army would not kill a single person on the battlefield. The people of Guangling Road would still all see them as Liang people. As they approached the North Jibei city, Su Fengnian received a concise spy report from the Gerfalcon's Claw. This time, he did not pass on the military intelligence to Xie Shibian, but the latter rode his horse over with a gloomy expression. He wanted to say something but stopped. Su Fengnian did not wear any armor. Instead, he wore a simple and elegant scholar's robe. He only wore a cold knife and a dragon-patterned jade pendant. He slowed down his horse and turned to Xie Shibian, saying, after Chao Changqing died, he scattered his fate energy into Guangling Road. You are not a qi cultivator nor a martial artist of the celestial state. Perhaps you do not understand the deeper meaning of this. To put it simply, from the moment of Chao Changqing's death, Guangling Road's fate energy, which had not been completely extinguished by the Jiang family of Dechu, began to truly belong to the territory of Liang. If Liang did not deal with it properly and started a massacre on the battlefield, or continued to make things difficult for Guangling on the issue of taxes, then it was very likely that Guangling Road would retaliate. Although the possibility of Yan King Zhao Bing rebelling immediately was not high, it was not completely impossible for him to take over Guangling. Therefore, Chao Changqing's death left a way out for the people of Guangling. No matter who they belong to, those who succeed must treat them well. Xie Shibian murmured, seeking benevolence and obtaining benevolence, seeking justice and obtaining justice. The two words obtaining justice sounded pleased. At this point, Xie Shibian lowered his head, his lips trembling. Su Fengnian could only somewhat awkwardly console him. General Xie, I do not dare to have extravagant hopes that you will enter the Beiliang frontier army. After all, in name, we are fighting against Beimang and guarding the country for the Zhao family of Liang. But regardless of the outcome of the war in Liangmang, I will guarantee the safety of your 500 people in West Chu. No matter how chaotic the world is, if I, Su Fengnian, want to keep your 500 people in peace, I can still do it. Xie Shibian turned a deaf ear to him, his face full of sorrow, muttering to himself, when I was young and studying, every time I flipped through a book and read Taibai's poetry, I read that kind of grand and magnificent writing of a flourishing age, I always had an infinite yearning. Something like, I must drink 300 cups of wine in one go, something like, the immortal waved his hand for me, as if listening to amaze 10,000 valleys pine trees. I really felt that if I stretched my neck and shouted it out loud, it still would not be enough to satisfy me. But at that time, the teacher always said that Taibai's poetry talent was too high, that the immortal's aura was too strong, that it was as if it was 30,000 feet above the earth, but it might not be the best poetry in the world. The older the scholar, the more experienced he was. Instead, he would be more open to old Du's simple poetry. I wonder how many souls I summon when I close my eyes. Deep in the battlefield at night, the bright moon shines on the white bones. It was really simple and straightforward. Where did the boundless talent come from? But reading it now, it's really. Xie Shibian was already choking with sobs. He raised his arm and wiped his cheeks with all his strength. This was perhaps the difference between Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai. The latter's experience of life and death was not as profound as the experience of honor and disgrace. Xie Shibian's will would be depressed, while Ko Jianghuai would be full of vigor. Su Fengnian looked toward the dusty Zbiqing and said, General Xie, from Zbiqing to Qinghe, and then to Huaiyang Pass, Liuya and Fuling, 2 towns, you can go anywhere. I will arrange for people to accompany you. If you want to see the 2 cavalry units outside Liangzhou Pass, it won't be a problem. Xie Shibian had already regained his composure. He nodded and said, Thank you, Wang Ye. Chapter 1759. Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh. Suddenly thinking about the situation in the Liang court, Su Fengnian's mood was somewhat heavy. West Chu no longer had the ability to rise from the ashes. As a result, Zhang Julu and Yuan Benxi's inner court matter had come to an end. Song Dongming and Bai Yu both believed that the Liang imperial court would allow Wu Zhongshuan to return to Tai'an City, and that Song Li, who had previously been in charge of the Eastern Front, and one of Wu Zhongshuan's generals, would be promoted together, becoming the 2 new leaders of the Guangling military. Jizhou General Yuan Tingshan might not be able to return to the border, but would remain on the north bank of the Guangling River near Jinggan Road. His 10,000 Yanbao private elite cavalry would be used to intimidate the Yan King Zhao Bing's southern army. As for the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, he would most likely lead his troops into Jizhou to help the administrator Han Lin impede Jidushi Kai Nan, and to a certain extent, monitor the Beiliang cavalry. However, Su Gong's subsequent official title was a bit more complicated. Would he continue to patrol the border as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, or would he directly become the deputy Jidushi and Jizhou general? However, the movement that was truly worthy of Beiliang's attention was the departure or stay of the Southern Expedition commander Lu Xingxiang. Regarding this, Qing Liangshan and the Beiliang governor-general had different opinions. The former believed that Lu Xingxiang would remain in the Liang imperial court for a period of time, while the latter believed that Lu Xingxiang would control all of the court's current field battle forces and advance north, eventually stationing himself in the area between Jizhou and the 2 Liao provinces. His forces would reach 80,000 to 90,000, forming a 3-point line of defense with Kai Nan, Su Gong, Gu Jiantang, and Zhao Sui. This would force Beimang to make the decision to fight the Second Great War of Liangmang. As long as this delicate situation was formed, with Su Gong and Lu Xingxiang, these two generals, stationing themselves in the northern border, not to mention Gu Jintang's plan, the use of Ji Zhou's Deputy General Han Feng as a hidden chess piece would be greatly reduced. In the end, Liang had too many people and even more soldiers that could be used. There were only two people who could influence or even change the situation in the Central Plains, the Prince of Shuchen Jibao and the Prince of Yan Qi Zhaobing. Now it all depended on whether or not these two were willing to obediently return to the territory of the Prince of Yan, or how quickly they left Guangling Road. As long as one of them dilly-dallied, then Lu Xingxiang would not be able to withdraw from Guangling Road. After all, a general under Wu Zhongshuan and Song Li was already very difficult to stabilize Guangling after the war. Furthermore, it was impossible for there to be no conflict of interest between the two sides. Without Lu Xingxiang, a high-ranking general from the spring and autumn period, once the situation changed, the court would not be at ease. If these were the long-term considerations of Beiliang, then Beiliang's immediate concern was the stability of the Beimang imperial court. Dong Zhuo had actually kept his position as the king of the South Courtyard. Although Su Fengnian had essentially killed off any signs of Dong Zhuo controlling the sky with one hand in Beimang, this was tantamount to letting go of Dong Zhuo, who had nowhere else to go. In the next battle, Dong Zhuo would not hesitate to take desperate measures. If it was said that in the first battle, then in the next battle, it was very likely that Dong Zhuo would throw caution to the wind. If necessary, even his private army of the Dong Zhuo would be wiped out. Xie Shibian had already gone far away. Su Fengnian did not enter the city to patrol. Even the white horse Yizong did not accompany him. He walked alone by the gradually rising river. His boots stepped on the lush green and soft grass, making a small sound. Su Fengnian sat on the shore and looked at the river, lost in thought. Outside the Liangzhou Pass, there was Chu Lushan's Beiliang Protectorate. Li Gongda led a large group of civil officials to supervise the construction of the new city. Everyone knew what to do, and they all did a good job. This made Su Fengnian, the nominal leader of the Beiliang cavalry, a burden. This was especially so before the war began. In fact, Su Fengnian's existence was more like a flag, standing tall on the northwest border, announcing to the Liang imperial court and the Beimang army that the four provinces of Beiliang were not to be trifled with. Su Fengnian subconsciously pulled up a strand of wild grass beside him, brushed off the soil, and put it in his mouth to chew. After the earthy smell, there were wisps of sweetness. After Huang Longsher died silently somewhere in the southeast, Miss He returned to Beiliang and said a lot of strange things she heard from the top 3 grades of spring and autumn. Su Fengnian only understood half of some of it, and he was confused about some of it. Some of it made him yearn for it, and some of it made him disappointed. Miss He said that in the future, in the Central Plains, the merchants and entertainers would be more eye-catching in the eyes of the common people than the officials in the imperial court. She said that in the future, no one would be able to see the status of the emperor. This year, it was my turn. As long as the world was not peaceful, as long as I had military power in my hands, I could proclaim myself a king. I might even be able to become the founding emperor. She also said that in the future, scholars would value profits more than fame, so it would be very difficult for there to be a true imperial tutor. Su Fengnian could not imagine that world. He remembered that his master, Li Shan, used only 3 words to persuade Su Shao not to rebel and not to divide the river with Liang. Fame, words, and deeds. The meaning was very simple. If the name was not right, the words would not be right. If the words were not right, the deed would not be done. In the late spring and autumn period where Su Shao lived, the most important thing was a person's foundation. Did the emperor, the king, the general, and the minister have the guts? The answer was, of course, yes. But what was interesting was that before the Great Qin, in the era where hundreds of schools of thought contended and nomads roamed freely, the answer was no. No matter if it was saints, generals, or ministers, it did not matter one's birth. In that brilliant era, when there were generations of sages, it was as if everyone was a dragon. When nomads became gentry, and then grew into powerful families, especially after the Great Feng dynasty chose only Confucianism, the rules of the world were set firmly. The sons and grandsons of the nobility all wore yellow and purple, and the peasants spent their entire lives crawling and fighting in the fields. All of this only changed after Zhang Julu took control of the Liang court. The imperial examinations were greatly promoted, and the poor scholars who had fought for hundreds of years for the sake of rules finally took the opportunity to rise. Many scholars from poor families were like carps that jumped over the dragon gate. In the late days of the Great Feng dynasty, there was a system of entering the emperor's hall. The two were similar but also very different. Because the latter could only speak for the master, while the former could speak for the world. So Su Fengnian remembered very clearly that even if his master, Li Shan, did not talk about what he knew in the first half of his life, in the latter half of his life at Tide Listening Pavilion, he was not willing to compare himself with Xiao Changling, Yuan Benshi, and the others. Instead, he had always paid attention to the various reforms of that blue-eyed person from Liang. Su Fengnian had unknowingly chewed up the weed and spat out the residue. He stood up and exhaled deeply. Since he did not need to criticize the construction of North Qianbei City, he might as well loaf around for a while. Su Fengnian suddenly disappeared from the river and rushed north. During this time, he saw the main force of the right cavalry changing camps according to their deployment. He saw the silhouette of Huayang Pass. In the end, Su Fengnian appeared in the dilapidated Tiger Head City. This former first city of Liang Pass had suffered great damage after Dongzhuo's wanton attacks for several months. Before retreating, most of the buildings in the city had been burned down. It was like a desolate tomb. The repair progress was extremely slow. Coupled with the occasional raid by Beimang's elite cavalry, even Chu Lushan, who had a special attachment to Tiger Head City, had to give up his energy. In the night, Su Fengnian sat cross-legged on the battlements of the city. He looked at the Longyan plain outside the city and closed his eyes. He could vaguely hear the whistling of giant rocks after 1,000 catapults were fired at the same time. He could vaguely hear the hoarse hooves of the cavalry charging to their deaths. He could vaguely hear the laughter and drinking of a large group of captains when he first entered the city, including Lu Jinu. The entire city had died in battle. Their fellow soldiers had died in the same cave. It was said that after Dongzhuo breached the city, he did not whip the corpses of the Beimang soldiers to vent his anger. He also did not build a Jingguan temple. He only walked up to the top of the city and used his hand to lift the flag with the word, Su, that was already on the verge of falling. Later on, the Beimang Empress ordered Dongzhuo to exchange Lu Jinu's corpse for Yang Yuanzhan's. Su Fengnian did not hesitate in the slightest. Not only did he agree to place Yang Yuanzhan's head and corpse in a coffin, he even handed over 5 or 6 more heads of Beimang generals. At the start, in Xiaoguang City's Yuzhou Conference Hall, there was an irascible general who was cursing on the spot. If it were not for Su Fengnian's secret letter and the young vassal king standing there, those generals probably would have cursed even if they had to lose their official status. Yan Winluan's expression was also unsightly. She clearly thought that the king of Beiliang was showing weakness to the Beimang barbarians. How could there be a man in the world who would express goodwill to the defeated general after winning a battle? At that time, the entire Yuzhou border army was about to explode. Only after Chu Lushan sent a sternly worded secret letter to Xiaoguang City did the commotion subside. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and said softly, Lu Jinu, Ma Jili, Chu Hanqing, everyone in Huda City, I'm sorry. I forgot to bring wine this time. However, I think the blood of the 300,000 Beimang soldiers is the best wine. Su Fengnian clenched his fists and placed them on his knees. He leaned forward and gazed toward the distant north. He smiled and said, Su Fengnian, promise everyone here that Beiliang will offer you 1,000,000 cups of this wine. Chapter 1760. The Huairou enclosure was famous for its beautiful scenery in the southern Beimang dynasty. It had always been the first choice of summer vacation for the people of the spring and autumn period. The A and B families all had a grassland here as a demonstration of their family's heritage. For example, the Wang family of the southern dynasty, which originally did not have the right to occupy a place here, obtained a vassal land here at the beginning of spring this year. Regardless of whether it was the marriage with the A family or the great-grandson of the century-old man becoming the winter abbot, the Wang family, which was once known as the Han Academy in the Central Plains for 10 generations, finally showed signs of prosperity. As summer entered, more and more large horses and embroidered clothes appeared in Huairou enclosure. That was why when a group of 30 riders appeared at the edge of the enclosure, it didn't stir up too much of a commotion. Some of the southern court's disciples who were brandishing their whips and urging their horses on gave each other a look. The carriage escorted by the riders left behind 2 long wool tracks on the grassy ground. The carriage that was originally spacious with 3 people inside now seemed a bit cramped. This was all thanks to that young and robust fatty. He sat there like a small mountain, currently resting with his eyes closed, a Northern Mang border army standard war blade resting on his knees. The other man and woman's appearances were a bit similar, likely brother and sister. Compared to the coarse young man, the woman had a bit more of a graceful and luxurious aura. Her looks couldn't be considered all that outstanding, but her figure was extremely good. As she sat there, her curves were exquisite, just like a blooming plump peony. Right now, the woman was currently reprimanding the younger brother who avoided her many times. The latter was cowering in fear, from time to time sending a pleading look towards the robust fatty. The woman couldn't stand her younger brother's cowardly appearance the most, so the anger within her surged even more, her heavy chest continuously trembling. She actually directly slapped her younger brother's face, the sound loud and clear. The younger brother, who was now already a high-ranking officer in Northern Mang Army, still didn't dare show the slightest sign of retorting, his head drooping, feeling wronged and nervous. When he heard that slap, the fatty finally couldn't help but say, "Eldest wife, that's enough. Since Yilu Hongkai didn't die at the mouth of the gourd, he definitely won't die on Northern Liang's side." It was fine if the fatty was quietly cultivating the vow of silence, but the moment he said that, the woman immediately vented her anger. "Dong Zhua. You still have the nerve to plead for him? If you did not insist on him leading the Dong family's private army to the mouth of the calabash to rescue Yang Yuanzan, would my brother be in danger? I have been running errands for you in Norland all these years. I helped you put in a good word for you in front of the governors and generals. Just to let you send my brother to his death? If you have the ability, why don't you lead the Dong family's cavalry to intercept the 2 Bailiang cavalry units?" The king of the king's palace of the Baimang South Courtyard, King, frowned and did not say a word. The fatty did not speak. For some reason, the unreasonable woman immediately felt a little guilty. The arrogance of a noble immediately disappeared. She turned her head and did not dare to look at her man. Yilu Hongkai said angrily, "Sister, brother-in-law, why are you quarreling over me? It's not worth it. Sister, why don't you beat me up? Last time, it's not brother-in-law's fault. Brother-in-law said to ignore the Eastern Front Army at the mouth of the calabash if the situation is bad. I was hot-blooded and led brother-in-law's cavalry into the mouth of the calabash, causing brother-in-law to lose thousands of men." The woman snorted and glared at Yilu Hongkai. Her face was full of anger. "If you die at the mouth of the calabash in Yuzhou, do you want our father to give birth to another son? At that time, won't our father resent your brother-in-law? Your brother-in-law originally did not have a firm foothold in the southern dynasty. After the war went badly, not only was the crown prince ready to make a move, but he also secretly roped in the civil and military officials of the southern dynasty led by Huang Songpu. Especially those remnants of the northern dynasty who are not familiar with him, they are all relying on him. Now, even Yilu Dongchuang has returned to the royal court. In the circle of the grassland bigwigs, he is constantly hitting your brother-in-law when he is down. If you die, how good will your brother-in-law be?" Fatty Dong rolled his eyes. Yilu Hongkai held back his laughter and looked up with a mischievous smile. "Sister, after all is said and done, you are still siding with brother-in-law. Those remnants of the spring and autumn period are indeed better at reasoning than us. No wonder they say that a married woman is like spilled water." The woman's face was slightly red. She raised her hand and was about to hit him. Yilu Hongkai quickly leaned back against the wall of the carriage and made a face. Chapter 1761. Dong Zhuo sighed. During this period of time, he felt as if he was being roasted on a stove. Although the emperor had magnanimously tolerated his defeat and had no intention of changing his tune, Dong Zhuo was well aware that when he became the king of Shangnan Academy, he had already used up all of the affection he had accumulated over the years on the battlefield. If he had seized the opportunity to win the Battle of Liangmang, it would naturally be a great thing to return the favor. Over time, the affection he had for his subordinates would increase instead of decrease. Unfortunately, things did not go as he wished. Bei Mang had suffered a crushing defeat outside the Bailiang Pass. In truth, the Battle of Liangzhou, where he had personally mobilized his troops, had been a situation in which his side had the absolute advantage. Liuzhou had been a Pyrrhic victory for Bailiang. Moreover, with the participation of Lu Gui and Tuoba, the loss could not be considered a loss. It could even be said that the regretful outcome of the Battle of Liuzhou had coincidentally served as a foil to Dong Zhuo's strength on the central front. However, the Bailiang cavalry had staked everything on one throw and caused the complete annihilation of great General Yang Yuanzhan's army, which had practically wiped out all of Dong Zhuo's painstaking efforts. Even now, Dong Zhuo still had to face the frenzied impeachment of Yang Yuanzhan's former subordinates. Who did not know that at that time, Bei Mang had viewed the Eastern Front as an expedition to the south to obtain military merits. With so many of the nobles of the northern and southern dynasties dead in one go, how could Dong Zhuo not become a rat despised by Bei Mang? What worried Dong Zhuo the most was not the nobles seeking revenge for the deaths of their juniors, but the old woman's aging and discouragement. That aging was not only the advancement of age, but also the loss of spirit. Originally, when Dong Zhuo saw her, she was an old woman who still had the confidence to personally witness the annexation of the Central Plains. The last time he saw her, she had already become an old woman who no longer had the extravagant hope of seeing the Guangling River in Liang. Fight Bailiang or the two Liao provinces? Previously, in all of Bei Mang, there were actually only 3 people who said that they wanted to fight Bailiang: himself, Dong Zhuo, the emperor, and the Taiping decree of the chess and sword music school. But in the end, it was still the old woman who had the final say. That was why Dong Zhuo had been on tenterhooks at that time. After the emperor had comforted this subordinate of hers, she had secretly summoned Wang Sui, who had appeared out of nowhere. It seemed that Wang Sui also insisted on conquering northern Liang first, then swallowing Xuzhou, and then entering the Central Plains in the east. This made the emperor decide to fight a second war with northern Liang. Dong Zhuo was rather glad about this, but he also felt a little uneasy. Wang Sui didn't want to fight Gu Jiantang, who had destroyed his country, but wanted to compete with Ren Tu's son. Dong Yue's son-in-law Wang Sui didn't have any relationship with Bei Mang, so it didn't make any sense. Dong Zhuo clenched his teeth out of habit, his face gloomy. At this very moment, that northern Mang Golden Branch and Jade Leaf who had previously flared up at him saw that her man was deeply worried, so she didn't dare to continue being unforgiving. In the end, she was on his side. Most women in the world were willing to follow their husbands after marriage. Moreover, in her heart, Dong Zhuo had always been an indomitable hero, a great flood dragon with the hope of becoming a dragon in the world. She had chosen Dong Zhuo back then, and the woman with the pseudonym Fan Bainu had flirted with the little Bailiang Tu Chenjibao. The notorious Princess Hong Yan of Yudou Province seemed to have some connection with the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian. Now, she was recklessly advocating going south to Liao. The carriage slowly came to a stop. Dong Zhuo alighted and looked at the elegant courtyard that made him feel like he was in Jiangnan of the Central Plains. The white walls, black tiles, and willow trees swayed gently. The courtyard wasn't big, and it wasn't famous in the Huairou enclosure. However, the 2 guests in the courtyard today held important positions in Bei Mang. Dong Zhuo and Dong Zhuo were both authoritative figures in the southern court who could shake the officialdom with a stomp of their feet. Dong Zhuo had always minded his own business with the 2 of them, but now he had no choice but to come. It was obvious that Dong Zhuo was in an awkward position in the southern court. Dong Zhuo suddenly missed his wife, the 5th fox, and of course, that innocent little girl, Tao Manwu. Then, Dong Zhuo, his wife, and Yelu Hongkai walked into the courtyard together. They saw Murong Baoding, who was appraising the half-faced Buddha, as well as the Zhong father and son, Zhong Shentong and Zhong Tan. At the same time, the Bei Mang crown prince secretly brought along the androgynous and handsome young man of unknown identity. Similarly, they were having a private meeting with a few important figures that couldn't be exposed. As for Yelu Dongchuang, who had returned to Beimang from Liang Lake with the broken spear Deng Mao, he was having a secret meeting with the leader of the Ruran cavalry, Hong Jingyan. As for the Beimang war god, Tuoba, he had once again rushed alone to the icy plains of the extreme north. He used an iceberg that never melted as a ferry to continue his journey north. There were fish in the northern underworld. In the Beimang imperial palace, an old woman was walking aimlessly. The eunuchs and palace maids only dared to follow her from a distance. She browsed through them one by one and seemed to remember many things from the past. Finally, she arrived at the square outside the main hall. The head of the peace of Beimang had been waiting there for a long time. Before the old woman approached the head of the peace, she gave a young palace maid a strange order. The palace maid was at a loss at first, then she quickly left. The two of them walked up the stairs together. She actually knew many things that many people thought she didn't know. She didn't say it, but that didn't mean she tacitly agreed. The first thing she said was unexpected. Our Beimang seems to have a lot of Yelu Hongkai and Yelu Hongkai. It's the same among the important figures. They always give their names so casually. Teacher, if we conquer the Central Plains and read more books, will we not be so careless? The head of the peace smiled and nodded. After the old woman reached the top of the stairs, she turned and looked towards the south. She extended a palm and then bent her fingers one by one. That crown prince of ours who became ambitious overnight, that pair of grandfather and grandson who share the same surname as the late emperor, and the head of the peace who shares the same clan as me. These three parties have already divided up half of my Beimang. The old woman bent her last two fingers. With the two of us, Beimang is gone. The head of the peace was silent. She laughed self-deprecatingly. That fatty dong is capable, but his fate is not very good. If he had helped me conquer Beimang, nothing would have happened. As a result, I ended up in my current situation. But it can be seen that my fate is not very good. The head of the peace said treacherously, Your Majesty's fate is not very good. Otherwise, if that woman in Dunhuang City gave birth to a boy, Your Majesty would be able to rest easy. The old woman's face was full of regret, and her eyes gradually turned cold. The old woman who had half the world under her pomegranate skirt said in a low voice, Give the order to Huang Songpu. No later than autumn, the two fronts will go to war at the same time. He, Huang Songpu, will either walk out of the north resisting city alive or die in battle. The head of the peace was stunned, but he still nodded without questioning. After the head of the peace left, the old woman waited for a long time. Finally, the young palace maid came back. She carefully held an unknown small wild flower in her hands. After the old woman asked everyone to leave her sight, she gently pinned the wild flower into her hair bun. She looked towards the south and thought of an old friend. Suddenly, her face became ferocious. She stretched out her finger and reprimanded, Su Shao, you make my life difficult, so I will not let you die in peace. Then she withdrew her hand. Her face suddenly calmed down, and her eyes were gentle. No one heard her whisper. Chapter 1762. Su Fengnian followed Huda's city to the east, turning into the mouth of the gourd. He then heard the wind pass through Crouching Bao City, weeping and complaining. After meeting Yan Wenluan, Chen Yinshui, and the other Yuzhou generals in Xiaoguang City, he entered Tuma Pass on the border. There, in the stone arena where the two Jianghu experts had once sparred, he once again heard the children of the private school playing and laughing together after school. Su Fengnian sat on the low yellow mud wall, thinking of Lu Nerong and Wang Dashi of the Fish Dragon Gang, as well as the child Zhao Yusong who lived on this land and had once borrowed a knife from him. He also thought of the little girl with frostbitten hands by Zhao Yusong's side. He thought of the banquet they had held together, talking and laughing, never forgetting about it. Finally, Su Fengnian thought of that little girl who looked like a grass in the countryside. After she entered the golden thread weaving bureau in Lingzhou, after their meeting on Mount Qingliang, she had saved enough money and paid off that debt of 100 or 200 taels of silver. She then resolutely left Liangzhou and returned here. Ever since he had first left Beiliang to travel the Jianghu, 6 years had unknowingly passed. He had traveled to many places, gotten to know many people, seen many things, and remembered many names. The pedestrians at Tuma Pass saw a young man dressed in a blue robe and wearing a white jade ornament on his waist. He raised his head and stared blankly at the sky. Yelu Dongchuang had said that as long as they formed an alliance with him and helped him become the emperor of Beimang, half of the southern court would be his tea money. Before long, Gu Jiantang had eaten the most expensive bowl of dumplings in the world. And regardless of whether the words were true or false, they were all gambling with the country, all shocking and heroic words. Su Fengnian lowered his head to look at the weeds and flowers growing quietly between the cracks of the mud wall. One by one, they were completely unremarkable and not spectacular at all. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the distant bustling marketplace. A white robe appeared beside him. When the white robe descended from the sky, there was not a single speck of dust on the wall. If everything had its vanquisher, then there were only a handful of people in the world who could pose a fatal threat to Su Fengnian, a great grandmaster instead of the king of Beiliang. After the death of Chao Chongqing, even Tuoba could not be counted as a threat if he could not make rapid progress in martial arts. Only the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai could be counted as half a threat. The reason why it was half a threat was not because Su Fengnian could easily defeat Dong Tai, but because Dong Tai was free and unfettered in Jianghu and had no reason to fight Su Fengnian to the death. Then the only one left was the person beside him, the only surviving grandmaster of qi training in the world, Tantai Pingjing, the head of the Guanyin sect, who had unwittingly gathered great luck. She stood beside Su Fengnian and said to herself, "A wildfire can't burn it out, and it will grow again when the spring breeze blows." But these are plants. Humans were not plants. Moreover, perhaps after some people died, some people would live a life worse than death. No matter how inconspicuous these people were in the midst of the surging waves of war, no matter how insignificant they were in the midst of the drums of war, no matter how insignificant they were in the midst of the war. I once followed my master to the north and south of the Yangtze River. I'm used to seeing life and death, but it doesn't mean that I can treat life and death lightly. Su Fengnian was silent. He hung one leg on the wall and bent the other leg. Su Fengnian's chin rested on that arm. The breeze blew on his face. He narrowed his eyes and appeared to be at ease. Tantai Pingjing's eyes were cold. Su Fengnian, I believe you should also understand that the current situation in the world is already against the rules. If Huang Longsher is taking advantage of the situation, then you are the culprit. Of course, there is also Wudong Li Yufu. If you stop now, it's still not too late. Maybe you can have a good ending. Su Fengnian smiled and said, according to Huang Longsher, Su Fengnian will die in Beiliang and be infamed in history for 100 years or 1,000 years. Is this your so-called good ending? Tantai Pingjing said indifferently, now they have made concessions. If you continue to push your luck, even if you are invincible in the world, so what? Don't forget that invincible in the world is only invincible in the world. Su Fengnian was non-committal. If I remember correctly, you should be grateful to me for your current state of cultivation. Tantai Pingjing's eyes were strange and completely snow-white, like 2 cups full of mercury and 2 snowy worlds. She gently stamped her feet. In a trance, the 2 of them were above the clouds. She stood in the air with the wind and Su Fengnian continued to maintain the same posture. The clouds gathered and dispersed beneath their feet. As they dispersed, they could see ribbons of varying sizes resembling streams and rivers. They were of varying thicknesses, and they flowed slowly on the ground. Su Fengnian glanced at it and knew that it was the real world in the eyes of qi trainers. One would not live long because of good people, and one would not die early because of evil people. One person's life and death, and a country's prosperity and decline. Su Fengnian raised his hand and twirled a weed between his fingers. He said softly, Huang Sanjia once said, reincarnating into this world, even if there are many benefits, it is also a golden millet pillow. Cultivate to immortal, live 1,000 years, and still need a few cups of green wine. How long can a golden millet pillow be? How much wine can a few cups hold? Plus the grass in front of me, they are all very small things. No matter what, I don't want to listen to any great principles now. The greater the principles, the less I want to listen. Chapter 1763. Tantai Pingjing, who had reached the celestial being realm, sneered, "Do you really think Gu Jiantang will help you become the emperor?" Tantai Pingjing put her hands behind her back and looked down at the world and the mountains and rivers. She answered her own question, "Yes, it's true. But no matter who becomes the emperor in the world, he will be able to be the emperor longer than you, Su Fengnian. Now Gu Jiantang, who has reached the realm of Deshang and can peek into the mysteries of heaven, has seen this, so he is so kind." Su Fengnian said calmly, "I guessed it." Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, "In fact, you only guessed half of it. Do you think that after Li Yufu cut off the connection between heaven and earth, you will not be bound by the laws of heaven? But have you ever thought that since you and Li Yufu, two ordinary people, can cross the thunder pool, there are not many abandoned pieces in heaven who will perish together with you? For hundreds of years, thousands of years, many outstanding people have achieved immortality. Can you and Li Yufu really escape this disaster?" Just when the two celestial beings were talking about the fate of the whole world above the clouds, Bailiang, Liang, Yanji County, Yuzhou, in the small place called Tuma Pass, there was a beautiful girl with a slender waist and a rather spectacular chest. After learning from the children in the village that the man appeared in the market, she plucked up her courage and trotted all the way there. She wanted to ask him if he could go back to his house to have a simple meal. She stood not far from the yellow wall, sweating profusely. She had to put her hands on her hips and bend down to gasp for breath. She did not see the figure that she did not even dare to miss. She missed him so much. Once she thought of him, she could not forget him. She knew that she and he were from two different worlds. Before she saw him in the Bailiang Palace on Mount Qingliang, she had already accepted her fate. After that, she was even more so. After learning that he appeared in Tuma Pass, she was about to cook for Yusong. She could have asked Yusong to invite him, but she did not. She asked Yusong to wash the rice and choose the vegetables, and then she ran to the Tuma Pass market. Because in this way, he would have to wait for her to cook when he arrived at her house. He could not eat until she finished the meal. She thought that no matter how busy he was, he might agree. He promised to stay not far away from her for a while. That was enough for her. He would not give her more than that, and she would not accept it. The woman named Su Qing stood in place. She straightened her back and wiped the sweat from her forehead. She smiled in satisfaction, as if she had already seen him. But after she turned and walked away for a few steps, she could not help but look back. She blushed. Tantai Pingjing found that Su Fengnian's gaze was wandering, and her pair of silver eyes were also moving with uncertainty. Su Fengnian retracted his gaze. The world was so big. How could he find him? Although he had used the spies of the Whispering Chamber to find him after he left Jianghu, Bailiang focused on the spies in the capital, Guangling Road, and Jinggan Road. The Whispering Chamber did not have a deep foundation in the southeast. Moreover, there were many mountains in the southeast. It was famous for different sounds and customs. News was blocked. If he wanted to find a needle in a haystack, it would probably take a long time. Moreover, if he was really lucky to find him, he would definitely not want to come to Bailiang. Su Fengnian could not go to his hometown now. Even if they met, it would be many years later. Su Fengnian hoped that by then, not only would that guy be safe and sound, it would be best if he had a family. Su Fengnian had imagined the scene of meeting again after a long separation. Thinking about it, it was not very emotional. Perhaps the two would only raise their palms and give each other a light high five. It should be that simple. Between brothers, there was no need to thank each other. No need to say sorry. In the end, Tantai Pingjing did not make a move. Su Fengnian stood up. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It seems that Master Tantai has no intention of putting all your eggs in one basket. Tantai Pingjing's eyes returned to normal. Why should I jump into such an obvious trap? Su Fengnian curled his lips and turned his head. Because of her tall stature, they only needed to look at each other at eye level. Su Fengnian smiled. That's how it should be. It won't be too late for you to make a move after I and Bei Mang have a life and death battle. Just as Su Fengnian was about to fall into the human world, he suddenly stopped. In this kind of battle of fate that has nothing to do with physique, as long as I'm near Bailiang, your chances of winning are not high. Tantai Pingjing raised her eyebrows. You want to ruin my state of mind with just a few words? Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. Tantai Pingjing disappeared without a trace. Su Fengnian stood in the sky and stretched his body. At this time, Su Fengnian didn't know if it was because his vision was broadened and his mind was broadened, but he felt a sense of heroism for no reason. He just remembered that when he fought in this life, whether it was a tie or a win, he seemed to be a little aggrieved. He had never really fought to his heart's content. Bei Mang, wait and see. Let me, Su Fengnian, fight 10,000 cavalry alone. Let me fight to the death for the only time in my life without any scruples. Not as the king of Bailiang, but as the great grandmaster of martial arts. Let's fight to our heart's content. Bei Mang's millions of cavalry want to enter the Central Plains, but they have to go through me, Su Fengnian. It was that simple. The figure standing between the sky and the earth, wearing a green robe and a jade pendant, hung a cold blade. Like a green grass. Su Fengnian, whose sleeves fluttered like an immortal, didn't know that. It was the heroism that filled his chest. Ancestor Lu, who passed the divine gate but didn't enter, had it. Li Chungang, who floated across the Guangling River with a sword, had it. Qiao Chongqing, who became the Confucian sage in the West Wall, had it. It was also called the Great Spirit. Chapter 1764. A pair of travel-worn Taoist master and disciple arrived at the estuary of Guangling River. They watched the 15th tide and escorted the dragon carp through the river into the sea. They started their journey back along the river and finally arrived at the border of Liangyu. The two could already see the magnificent scenery of Wudang's 81 peaks. In the evening, the glow of the sunset hung in the western sky. The young Taoist master carried his exhausted young disciple and walked slowly. His steps were steady. The little Taoist who followed his master across half of Liang was sleeping soundly. When they arrived at the foot of Wudang Mountain, the young Taoist master saw an unexpected familiar figure. He wore a green robe and had a sword at his side. He walked forward quickly. Because he was carrying his disciple, he could not bow and greet him. He could only nod his head in greeting. The young man at the foot of the mountain also nodded his head in return. Without any warm words, they climbed the mountain silently. After walking past the four-character memorial arch written by Lu Zhu himself, Hong Shixiang, or perhaps the reincarnated little Taoist Yu Fu of Lu Dongxian, suddenly opened his eyes. He lay on his master's back sleepily and turned to look at the handsome young man walking side by side with his master. For some reason, the child felt a natural closeness to him but also an involuntary fear. At this moment, the drums of Wudang's peak sounded at the same time. The melodious sound reverberated between the mountains. Su Fengnian, who was in a trance, came back to his senses at the sound of the drums. He turned his head and looked at the little Taoist. Speaking of which, Li Yufu was able to find this Jiangnan village child named Yufu because of Su Fengnian's help. It was during that battle against Wang Xianji that Su Fengnian had no choice but to go on an out-of-body journey. After that, he vaguely discovered signs of the child's enlightenment. Following the clues, Li Yufu successfully brought the child back to Wudang Mountain. Su Fengnian looked at the young and tender face. Apart from the child's clear eyes, which were just like the elephant washing pond on Wudang Mountain, and the demeanor of the ox-riding martial granduncle, there seemed to be no other similarities. Su Fengnian looked at the ignorant little Daoist child, and for a moment, all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. Su Fengnian did not have much impression of the immortal Lu Zhu and the immortal Qi Xuanzhen, but how could he forget that lotus flower peak Daoist priest called Hong Shixiang? Su Fengnian could not help but reach out his hand and pinch the little Taoist boy's slightly tanned face. Probably because he used too much strength, the child grimaced and did not dare to refuse. He was just a little angry. Su deliberately said fiercely, "Before you grow up, if you dare to fall in love with someone else, I'll beat you to death. You. The little Taoist boy said angrily, cultivators are devoted to Taoism and do not talk about love. What are you talking about? Su Fengnian snorted, is it your master who taught you this, or the old immortal Qin Yao who taught you this *T principle? The little Taoist boy almost blurted out. He secretly pulled the collar of his master's Taoist robe. Li Yufu said softly, this is our king of Bailiang. I can't afford to offend him, and neither can your martial granduncle Chen. The little Taoist boy quickly said seriously, it's the principle that I figured out. It has absolutely nothing to do with martial granduncle Chen. Su Fengnian and Li Yufu looked at each other and smiled. Then they glanced at the little Taoist boy who was carrying a small bamboo box that was crudely woven. What's in the bamboo box? The little Taoist hesitated for a moment, but he still answered honestly, this little Taoist and master have traveled thousands of kilometers to the east. Along the way, master often treated patients. Many of the medicinal herbs were picked by me from the mountains, and the medicine was also brewed by me. There were some patients who insisted on paying master for his treatment, so master had no choice but to accept them. He would also give me some copper coins while he was at it, and this little Taoist saved them all up. On the way back, I bought some gifts for Grandmaster Yu and Grandmaster Chen. The little Taoist boy's charcoal-like face made his eyes brighter. Yu Fu was in a good mood because he would soon be able to see the senior Taoist priests on the mountain. He was especially happy when he thought of Martial Granduncle Yu and the others after receiving his gifts. But the guy in front of him, whose name could be heard even in the southeast coast, made the child's mood fall to the bottom with just one sentence. Those little things in your box, if I received this kind of worthless gift, I would quickly throw them to the corner. The little Taoist boy's face suddenly became gloomy. He wanted to say something but stopped. He wanted to refute, but he couldn't be righteous, so he simply shut his mouth. Su Fengnian smiled and said, why don't you sell the box to me? I'll give you a few hundred taels of silver. You can go to Escape Summer Town and pick a few valuable things. How about it? Yu Fu didn't immediately refuse or agree. Instead, he whispered to his master, Master, what do Martial Granduncle Yu and Martial Granduncle Chen, Martial Uncle Han and Martial Brother Qing Xan like? Li Yufu didn't help the young king to do evil. He smiled and said, they all like the gifts you give them. The little Taoist boy said pitifully, but the things in my box are really worthless. Li Yufu smiled and said, valuable things are often only valuable. We are cultivating on the mountain. It doesn't matter whether it's valuable or not. The little Taoist boy quickly smiled and stared at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian also stopped teasing the naive little Taoist boy. He stopped smiling and said to Li Yufu, Teacher Li, don't you want to think about it? After all, for you, you are different from the ordinary people in the world. Even if you have regrets in this life, you can use them to make up for them in the next life. Once you do that, there is really no way back. Li Yufu smiled and asked, isn't the prince the same? Chapter 1765. Su Fengnian said helplessly, but the two of us are still different. You came from the top of the mountain, I came from the bottom of the mountain. In order to achieve my wish, I faced many obstacles, from Wang Xianji to Xia Guining to Tantai Pingjing. And in the end, I acted out of selfishness. You didn't have to do this. You could achieve immortality peacefully and become a celestial. Moreover, Wudang Mountain has always been an anomaly. As long as you are willing to ascend and accept the enlistment, I believe that the top will give you a big reward. Taking a step back, even if sect leader Li chooses to stay in the world like the Wudang ancestors, there will be a day in the future when a Wudang Taoist priest will take you as a disciple just like how sect leader Li carried Yu Fu on his back. He will bring you up the mountain to cultivate again and continue to accumulate merit. Yu Fu Li walked up the stairs with his disciple Yu Fu on his back and said slowly, since Ancestor Lu set the rules, Wudang Mountain is very similar to Bailiang today. To put it bluntly, it is like a frontier town in the human world. But because there is a bottom line, we have never crossed it. That's why we can barely survive until today. After I came up the mountain, I was ashamed that I cultivated my mind more than my strength. I looked through the handwritten letters of the previous headmasters, read the history books, and even read the Buddhist scriptures. In my spare time, I occasionally went to the big and small lotus peaks to look into the distance. Over time, I had some ideas that I shouldn't have. Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily and said, "Today I know that it's not only you and me, Bailiang and Wudong are also in the same boat." Yu Li joked, "Why don't you use the phrase, like-minded?" Su Fengnian glanced at the little Taoist boy Yu Fu and said softly, "If I'm not wrong, the next headmaster of Wudong Mountain after you should be Han Gui from the Green Mountain Taoist Temple." The Taoist priest who was praised by the old headmaster Wang Zhonglo as righteous and sincere, "The further you go. After that, it will be this guy. Wang Zhonglo, Hong Shixiang, Yu, Han Gui, Yu Fu. In just a few years, I have seen 5 headmasters of Wudong." Li Yufu said regretfully, "Unfortunately, I'm afraid I'll only be able to see His Highness, the King of Bailiang." Su Fengnian and Li Yufu were resting in a pavilion located halfway up the mountain. In the darkness of the night, the lights of the escaped summer town at the foot of the mountain were dim. The little Taoist boy Yu Fu had fallen asleep again. Li Yufu said softly, "The fate of West Chu that Chao Chongqing carried has been scattered to Guangling Taoism. However, the fate of Chao Chongqing as the Confucian sage, I can't figure it out." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "It was split into 2. One was given to Zhao Zhu, the crown prince of Yanqi. The other was originally given to Chen Jibao, but the latter refused for some reason. Thus, it was absorbed by Tantai Pingjing of the Guanyin sect." Li Yufu asked curiously, "Compared to Chen Jibao, Chao Chongqing should be closer to you." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Li Chungang lost to Wang Xianji, and Wang Xianji lost to me. Chao Chongqing chose Chen Jibao." At first, outsiders were puzzled. The truth may take a long time to be revealed. Li Yufu looked into the distance and said, "The size of Jianghu depends on the fate. Huang Longsher made Jianghu enter an unprecedented year in the past 20 years. Masters came out in large numbers. If it was in the era of Gao Shulu or Lu Songtao, a Jianghu could accommodate 3 or 4 terrestrial immortals at most. In bad years, there may only be 1 or 2. There were only a dozen martial artists who reached the 1st grade. I believe that the predecessors couldn't imagine the prosperity of Jianghu in these years. Originally, after the death of Chao Chongqing, either someone could quickly become an terrestrial immortal, or many 1st-grade masters would emerge. I didn't expect that in the end, it was the Qi trainer grandmaster who became a celestial being." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It has always been the modern people who are ashamed to face the ancient people. Now it is the ancient people who are ashamed to see the modern people. It is very interesting." Li Yufu suddenly said, "Your Highness, from then on, Mount Wudong will need your care." Su Fengnian said with a sad face, "Then won't there be another burden on my shoulders?" Li Yufu laughed and said, "When I went down the mountain to travel, I heard an interesting saying. The lice on the rich are double eyelids. The more I think about it, the more reasonable it is. Your Highness has a big family and business, so don't refuse." Su Fengnian smiled. Then, he felt a bit of sadness in his heart as he looked at this young Taoist who was destined to one day disappear from this life. Su Fengnian and Li Yufu both knew that the way of heaven was selfless. The so-called good will be rewarded with good and evil will be punished with evil. This was only the beautiful pursuit of the world that was almost wishful thinking. In fact, as long as there were immortals and gods in the clouds, the world could not escape the fate of being a puppet. Su Fengnian wanted to cut off the karma for himself. Li Yufu wanted to cut off the karma imposed on the world by the celestial being. The battle between the celestial being and the celestial being that the two fought side by side may have been quiet from beginning to end, but it determined the grand pattern of the world for the next 1,000 years. Su Fengnian still did not know what Li Yufu was really thinking and what he wanted. However, when Su Fengnian looked at this young Taoist in a plain and clean Taoist robe, his heart was filled with respect. Li Yufu carried his disciple Yu Fu on his back, and the little Taoist boy carried the small bamboo box. The young leader of Wudong exhaled and said softly, "I want to say something for the world." Su Fengnian was puzzled. The young Taoist looked at the peaceful night in the distance and said with a smile, I hope that in the world after my death, the gentleman will strive for self-improvement and the gentleman will be virtuous. I hope that thousands of years later, whether there is Jianghu or not, there will be chivalrous people who will act righteously. Su Fengnian could not help but interrupt, is that 2 sentences? Li Yufu nodded and said with a smile, then I will say one more sentence. Su Fengnian was silent for a moment, this can be. The two stood side by side on the mountainside of Wudong. It seemed that 1,000 years had passed. Chapter 1766. In Jianghu, it was a dark and windy night to kill. On the battlefield, it was autumn when the horses were fighting. Fortunately, it was not autumn yet and it was summer. In the temple of the Southern Dynasty in Beimang, there were many basins of ice and it was chilly. An old woman wearing an old yellow dragon robe made in the style of the Southern Tang Dynasty was sitting leisurely on the steps in front of the dragon throne instead of sitting high up on the dragon throne. There were more than 40 people standing in the spacious hall, but it was not crowded. The hall was not divided by civil and military officials. On the right side of the hall were people wearing yellow and purple official robes, no different from the officials who attended the court meeting in Liang. On the left side, most of them were wearing casual clothes, but almost all of them had Xianbei jade belts on their waists. Among them, there was the first person of the old Southern Dynasty, Huang Songpu, who had returned to command military power, Dong Zhuo, who still held the title of King of the Southern Courtyard, Helian Wuwei, who was in charge of the Heshi province, Wang Yong, who was in charge of the Aquarius province, Murong Baoding, who was in charge of the Tangerine province, General Zhong Shintong, Lu Gui, who had lost in the Battle of Lu province in Bailiang, Wang Yong, who was in charge of the Aquarius province, and Wanyan Jinliang, who was in charge of the Longguan aristocracy. Not only were these Beimang generals and heroes gathered, but there was also Beimang's only surviving minister for 3 dynasties, Yelu Hongkai, the leader of the Ruran cavalry, Hong Jingyan, and Crown Prince Yelu Hongkai. In addition, the younger generation had Tuoba Chi Yun, who rose to fame in the first battle of Liangmang, Zhong Tan, who was in charge of the Beimang Boer Hui, King Jingchong, Yelu Dongchuang, and Princess Yelu Meiyu, who was once known as Fan Bainu and had the reputation of being the best player of the Beimang horse drum, and Yelu Yuhu, who had missed the title of Xia Zhibo, and so on. These people were undoubtedly the most prominent figures in the northern court and the southern court. At this time, everyone was quietly looking at the old woman who rarely appeared in the southern court. It was said that the dragon robe was made by the old southern Tang weaving family of the remnants of the spring and autumn period. Back then, His Majesty liked its graceful and luxurious appearance, so he specially chose this robe from the 6 patterns of dragon robes, and it had never been changed. Today, after the old woman had gathered everyone in this splendid hall, she was not in a hurry to start the discussion. She just sat on the comfortable steps covered in a beautiful lichen with 9 golden dragons. Next to the old woman's feet was a thin, crystal-clear porcelain basin with a delicate dagger in the ice. The old woman picked up the dagger and casually fiddled with the ice. She said without reason, I heard that Li Gongda, the Taoist administrator of Bailiang, has a son who has made great military achievements. As a white horse crossbowman, he has been to the gentleman's pavilion? Li Mibi, who had single-handedly created the Beimang spider web, said in a deep voice, Your Majesty, there is indeed such a person. His name is Li Hanlin. After he entered the Bailiang frontier army, he participated in more than 20 battles, big and small. In every battle, he always took the lead. Now, he has become a crossbowman lieutenant. The old woman laughed and said, In only 3 years, he has become a Bailiang crossbowman lieutenant? Isn't it said that in the world, the Bailiang frontier army is the most difficult to be promoted, and the white horse crossbowman is even more difficult to be promoted? Either this young man's father is really powerful, or our Beimang frontier army is too easy to chop off. When the Beimang Empress said this, Dong Zhuo, Lu Gui, and the other people's faces were obviously a little ugly. However, the big shots like Zhong Shintong and Murong Baoding, who were not involved in the war of Liangmang, were much more relaxed. There was even a subtle smile on their faces. The old woman glanced at Li Mibi, who was standing apart from the others. She seemed to have thought of something and said with a smile, among the 5 great sects of the northern Mang, not to mention the one-man sect Huyen Grand Temple, Tao Virtue Sect, Chess Sword and Music House, Bubang Mountain, and Princess's Tomb, the 4 great sects can be said to be powerful in numbers. Their sword chi is close to yellow and green. The Bronze Man Ancestor, Thirsty, and Small Thoughts are all top masters. Even I have heard of them. In the end, they all died in northern Liang. I also heard in Norland that the Liang Jianghu has always looked down on our northern Mang's Jianghu. They said that each of them would choose 10 masters to fight in pairs. Even the martial arts masters of Liang Jianghu are not worthy of carrying shoes for them. The old woman laughed to herself without a trace of anger. She found Hong Jingyan, who was born blind, in the crowd. She raised her head and looked at the leader of the Ruran cavalry, who had a mixed reputation. Hong Jingyan, you were once ranked in the top 10 of the old martial arts evaluation. That demon Luo Yang can be considered your junior in the chess and sword music school. Tell me, can you kill the king of Bailiang, one of the 4 grand masters of martial arts evaluation? Hong Jingyan cupped his fists expressionlessly and said, I can't kill him. The old woman nodded. Then what if you, Murong Baoding, and Zhong Shintong's younger brother, Zhong Liang, join forces? Hong Jingyan still shook his head and said, I can't kill him. The old woman said, if that's the case, at that young vassal's level, only Tuoba can fight him. What a pity. If not for that little girl from West Chu with the surname Jiang, Li Mibi would have succeeded in the western regions. Hong Jingyan remained silent. In the Battle of Huluku, the entire army, including Yang Yuanzhan, had been wiped out. Only his Ruran cavalry had been lucky enough to avoid 2 of Bailiang's heavy cavalry and break out of the encirclement. Although they had suffered heavy casualties, they had managed to preserve the structure of the Ruran cavalry. They did not fall to the point where they were completely wiped out. However, Hong Jingyan's reputation in Beimang had been greatly damaged because of this. If not for a group of nobles from Bailiang pleading for leniency, the Ruran cavalry would not have continued to bear the surname Hong. Afterwards, Dong Zhuo hated Hong Jingyan for avoiding battle to protect himself. He blamed the failure of the Battle of Liangmang on the Ruran cavalry's desertion of their post. If Hong Jingyan had been willing to delay the Liangzhou cavalry and wait for the Dong cavalry under his command to reinforce Huluku, even if Yang Yuanzhan's army was unable to escape, they would not have all died at Huluku. The old woman smiled. That lame Su has only been a master all his life, but he has a very promising son. No wonder he told us many years ago that when his father was drunk, he would always say that Su Shao should not be too ambitious after growing up. In the future, his grandson will be twice as big as you, Su Shao. Huang Songpu, Lu Gui, and the other old generals who had made outstanding contributions and were loyal and devoted had a strange and embarrassed look on their faces. Meanwhile, the young generals like Tuoba Chiyun and Zhong Tan also had an eye-opening look on their faces. After all, some of the palace rumors that had been circulating in Beimang for many years could not be taken seriously as long as the person involved did not agree to it. The old woman joked, Chao Chongqing died outside Tai and city, but other than Su Fengnian, there was also the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. If the 2 of them called for 2 or 3 helpers of similar cultivation levels, such as Sui Xia and Gu, then wouldn't my head be the same as Su Huainan, the king of the old North Court by the Ruoshui years ago? That kid Su Fengnian took my head away just like that. I don't mind telling you that not only did the Qi cultivators of the imperial astronomer of Liang die, our Beimang is not much better. Now, those flying land immortals' movements are not easy to grasp. If Su Fengnian suddenly appeared outside the main hall today, how would you stop him? The main hall was silent. No one could answer this tricky and heart-wrenching question. The old woman held a dagger and gently broke a piece of ice. She did not make things difficult for these high-ranking Beimang officials. She sighed softly. It is said that a martial artist in Jianghu is no match for 100 people, but a general on the battlefield is a match for 10,000 people. It is also said that a county magistrate can destroy a county governor. It seems that as long as one is an official, whether civil or military, it is more impressive than practicing martial arts. Therefore, I don't understand why Su Fengnian left His Royal Highness to wander around Jianghu and then went to Wudang Mountain to practice martial arts. I am even more curious why lame Su tolerated his eldest son's unscrupulous behavior. At that time, I only thought that Su Fengnian had no choice. He wanted to compete with Chen Jibao for the military power of the Beiliang cavalry. His military achievements and reputation would definitely be hard to match. He could only think of a way out for himself. Since he could no longer stay in the imperial court, he might as well go to Jianghu and show off while he still had some family background. Looking back, if Su Fengnian did not become a martial arts grandmaster because of him, Chen Jibao would not have left Chuliang and entered Shu. At this point, the old woman fell into a long silence. Dong Zhuo quietly sighed. Then, this fat man calmly sized up a young woman out of the corner of his eye. Princess Yelu Yuhu. Back then, if Su Fengnian naturally could not bear this great responsibility and Chen Jibao ultimately replaced him in Beiliang, then perhaps the Great War of Liangmang would never have happened. Beimang would most likely have chosen Liaodong or Jizhou to invade from the south. The reason was very simple. On one hand, they feared the white-clothed war saint Chen Jibao's godly ability to command troops. More importantly, Chen Jibao, through Yelu Yuhu, had secretly conveyed a certain attitude to Beimang. That was, if Beimang started a war outside of Beiliang, whether it was going south from Jizhou to the Central Plains or engaging in a decisive battle with Gu Jintang's two Liaoning border armies, the Beiliang frontier army would only watch from the sidelines. However, Chen Jibao only promised that he would watch from the sidelines before Beimang captured Great and City. He did not make any promises about his future plans. This tacit understanding naturally could not be kept on paper, but Dong Zhuo believed that Chen Jibao truly did have such plans back then. It was not completely absurd to say that it was Su Fengnian who had personally dragged Beiliang into the quagmire of war between the two countries. Of course, at the time, all of Beimang did not believe that they would lose. They only believed that even if they captured Beiliang, there was no profit to be gained. In the end, both Beimang and Liang were caught off guard. Now, Beimang was riding a tiger and could not get off. Even the powerful officials of Beimang who had previously insisted on going down the two Liaos to attack Great and City, no matter how much they rejoiced in their misfortune, did not dare to show the slightest objection. This was because, despite the gentle appearance of the emperor sitting before them, everyone knew that if anyone dared to expose her shortcomings at this time, only death would await them. Chapter 1767. The old woman put away her thoughts and slowly said, "The order of peace will arrive soon." Then, right now, in this large room, pretty much all of Northern Mang's influential figures have gathered. We hope that everyone can speak freely. However, before we discuss the country's affairs, we have a small matter for you all to do. Everyone immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They all put on a respectful posture and listened attentively. The old woman raised the dagger that was stained with some ice shards and pointed at Dong Zhuo and Lu Gue. Beiliang scouts wander freely in the Longyan Plains near Huda City and the northern border of Liuzhou. People say that the White Horse crossbowmen are the best scouts in the world. I don't want to believe that. Dong Zhuo, your crow pen and Lu Gue, your black fox pen are the most elite horse pens in Beimang. I hope that before autumn, no matter how many of you die in battle, I don't want to see even a single Beiliang crossbowman. Dong Zhuo's face was full of pain. Lu Gue wanted to say something but stopped. The old woman didn't put away the dagger. She sneered and said, 300,000 of our men died outside Beiliang. What's the big deal about 1,000 more deaths? Throw out all the fences of crows and black foxes. The old woman's face became colder and colder. She said sternly, let's not talk about the imperial bulletin of the provincial governors of Liang Imperial Court. We can even get the imperial bulletin of the Judici and the administrator. However, the war with Beiliang is imminent, and we can't even get a single useful spy report on the specific deployment of the Beiliang Frontier Army. Not a single one. What a joke. Lu Gue bowed and said in a deep voice, my black fox pen was willing to die before the war. Dong Zhuo had no choice but to agree. Crow's Nest is the same. At this moment, the imperial decree of peace walked into the main hall with a scroll in his hands. Under the instructions of the Empress of Beimang, a huge map of the Liangmang confrontation was spread out at the bottom of the stairs. It was more than 10 feet long and wide. It included Huda City, Huayang Pass, Liuya Fuling Grave, and the 3 military towns, as well as Beiju City, which was being rapidly built. The map had a panoramic view of the entire Liangzhou Pass. As for the passes of the 4 prefectures, it was even more detailed and accurate, down to the county level. Apart from the geography, Beiliang's Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, the left and right cavalry, the Longxiang Army, the 2 heavy cavalry armies, and all the other main forces in the field were also marked in the vicinity of a certain encampment. From the leading general to the approximate number of soldiers and horses, everything was written in red ink. The old woman stood up and casually threw the dagger into the porcelain basin mixed with ice water. She walked down the stairs and lowered her head to look at the huge map. Ever since I ascended the throne, other than appointing the leading generals, I have never made any decisions regarding military affairs. This time, I will make an exception. After she finished speaking, she concentrated on looking down at the map. The imperial decree of peace stood by her side and said calmly, "The second southern expedition will be held at the beginning of autumn. There will be no commander." In order to avoid certain situations, Tuoba has already stepped down from his position as the king of the northern courtyard. He will only lead a personal army. The imperial decree of peace looked calmly at the king of the southern courtyard, Dong Zhuo. The fat man's face was impeccably blank. Beimang's elder, Yelu Hongkai, sneered, "Fatty Dong, playing dumb won't work this time." Dong Zhuo remained blank for a long time under everyone's gazes. In the end, he could not resist the imperial decree of peace's gaze. He first looked with a tearful face at the emperor and found that the old woman remained unmoved. Dong Zhuo quickly returned to his carefree state and said with a smile, "Since our military god is no longer the king of the northern courtyard, Dong Zhuo have no virtue or ability to lead a group of officials alone. I will also not be the king of the southern courtyard." Only after Dong Zhuo had relented did the imperial decree of peace continue. The first line consists of 4 armies, Dong Zhuo, Huang Songpu, Murong Baoding, and Lu Gui. Each of them will have a deputy. They are Hong Jingyan, Zhong Tan, Yelu Dongchuang, and Tuoba Chiyun. It wasn't strange to set up 4 armies, but the idea of a deputy general was worth pondering over. Dong Zhuo and Hong Jingyan had once been rivals in the fight for the king of the southern courtyard. The Dong family's private army and the Ruren cavalry were all top elites of Beimang. It could be said that enemies were bound to meet. Huang Songpu and Zhong Tan, this pair of old and young, were very exciting. There was no need to mention the old general Huang Songpu. In the past, he was nominally the leader of the officials of the Southern Dynasty. He was also one of the 13 generals of Beimang with real power. Zhong Tan had already proven in the first battle of Liangmang that a tiger father would not beget a dog son. Although Beimang had suffered a great defeat at the Battle of Huluku, this could not deny Zhong Tan's brilliant achievements in the previous 3 sieges. As the eldest son of General Zhong Shintong, it was already a foregone conclusion that Beimang would have a father-son pair of great generals in the future. As for Murong Baoding and Yelu Dongchuang, just the 2 surnames alone were enough to make people's imaginations run wild. Great General Lu Gui and the head of the 4 great banquets, Tuoba Chiyun, were both leading the same army. This was enough to place high hopes on them. The Taiping decree said in a low voice, "After Dong Zhuo and Murong Baoding's armies pass Huda City and head south, they will be in charge of the battle outside Liangzhou Pass. Huang Songpu will attack Qingsang City in Liuzhou and cut off the connection between the Longxiang Army in Liuzhou and Zbiqing City in Liangzhou. They will also need to involve the iron stupas of Qidong and Yuan Nanting's white feather light cavalry. Lu Gui will station his troops outside Huluku in Yuzhou to prevent the Yuzhou cavalry from using this place as an exit. During this time, Zhong Tan will pay special attention to the movements of the Beiliang cavalry general Chao Wei's troops to prevent them from breaking into our southern dynasty territory in the area of Linyao Army Town. Dong Zhuo's infantry must take Huayang Pass, where the Beiliang Protectorate is located, before winter. Murong Baoding, your mission will be to annihilate the Beiliang cavalry in Liuya, Fuling, and the other military towns. The Taiping decree looked at the 8 generals with different expressions. Perhaps you all want to ask, if He Zhonghu and Zhou Kang's 2 main Beiliang cavalry forces head north, how should we deal with them? The answer is extremely simple. Other than the first line, we have a second line of battle that will coordinate with you. Similarly, there are 4 main armies, Zhong Shentong, Wanyan Jinliang, Helian Wei, Wang Yong, each of you will lead an army. When the time comes, you will be stationed in the Longyan Plain north of Huda City and wait for an opportunity to move. When He Zhonghu's left cavalry forces head north, Zhong Shentong and Wanyan Jinliang will head south. For the same reason, Helian Wei and Wang Yong will target Zhou Kang's right cavalry. Without waiting for the people in the hall to raise their objections, the Taiping decree continued, His Highness the Crown Prince and Tuoba will each lead an army as the third line of reinforcements. They will follow the army of the second line of battle and head south. As long as there is an accident on the battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass, they will definitely rush to the battlefield within a day. This kind of deployment of troops made people dumbfounded. It wasn't too unconventional, nor was it too high up in the air. Instead, it was too straight. It was like a fight between young children. They only knew how to use brute force. Punches and kicks were exchanged back and forth. There were no moves to speak of, so it seemed particularly ordinary. This did not seem like a big move that Bei Mang's imperial preceptor should have made after racking his brains. Almost any ordinary commander from Bei Mang's army would be able to make such a deployment. The most important thing was that this kind of deployment revealed an obvious cold-blooded cruelty. It was obvious that they wanted to force the 4 armies on the front line, especially the 2 in the middle, to fight to the death with Beiliang. There was no fancy, no room for maneuver. They were just going all out to exchange troops with the Beiliang frontier army. They would either win a Pyrrhic victory or die. In short, there would be no good ending. Dong Zhuo's eyes were gloomy, and Murong Baoding's face was filled with anger. Deputy General Yelu Dongdao, who had unknowingly become a grasshopper on a string with Murong Baoding, did not look any better. He turned to look at his grandfather, Yelu Hongkai, but the old man only shook his head, indicating for him to calm down. Chapter 1768. Helian Wei, Heshi Prefecture's disciplinary magistrate, and Wang Yong, Aquarius Prefecture's disciplinary magistrate, although they were not the main force on the front line, most of them had heavy hearts. Zhong Tan's face was expressionless, while Tuoba Chiyun felt relieved, and then smiled knowingly. Bei Mang's crown prince, Yelu Hongkai, who rarely showed his face in the imperial court, gave people a feeling of being completely uninvolved. The Taiping magistrate turned a blind eye to the solemn atmosphere in the imperial court. He lowered his head and shifted his line of sight to Liangyi Prefecture, Jizhou, and the other northern regions. This battle is not only fought north of Beiliang's Bibu city, but also outside of Beiliang. I have a few questions. You are all pillars of Bei Mang, so why don't you answer my questions? The first question is about Lianghuai Prefecture's Judushi Kai Nan and Administrator Han Lin's attitude toward Beiliang. Once the battle situation in Beiliang is not favorable, with Kai Nan's troops as the main force, will the Lianghuai border army stand by and watch them die, or will they be willing to take the risk and advance west? For the first time, Helian Wei, who had always been taciturn, was the first to speak. Absolutely not. Liang Imperial Court has just conferred Kai Nan with the title of Marquis. No matter what kind of thoughts Kai Nan has towards Beiliang, he certainly won't dare to send troops without authorization. Moreover, Kai Nan is an old general under Gu Jiantang. His actions can easily affect the whole situation. He is destined not to implicate Tang Taizhuang and his group of colleagues. The Taiping magistrate nodded and said, the second question is, after Ji Province's General Yuan Tingshan took away the Li family's Yan Castle cavalry, and now the Liang Imperial Court has already left him at Guangling Road to assist Wu Zhongshuan in cleaning up the mess together with Song Li. Under this premise, Liang will most likely send either Lu Xingxiang or Su Gong to Ji Province. Will their arrival have a decisive impact on the direction of the Huai and Huai border matters? In my view, not only will Lu Xingxiang enter the Two Rivers, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, will also arrive at the same time. However, the use of these two people will not be of any benefit to the Battle of Bailiang. Instead, it will be of the same origin as Gu Jintang's attack. It is just that Li Yang hopes that our Beimang Iron Cavalry will persist in attacking Bailiang. It will also prevent us from advancing to Great Peace City once Bailiang is defeated. With Kai Nan's army and these two famous generals of Liang personally coming to the north, in addition to Gu Jintang's two Liao armies, I believe that only then will the emperor of the Zhao family be truly at ease. Therefore, the arrival of Lu Xingxiang and Su Gong will not change the situation of the Battle of Bailiang. The Taiping magistrate smiled at this rising star and then asked, the third question is, previously, Chao Wei of Bailiang's 10,000 cavalry hid in the western regions and attempted to take a long detour to attack the hinterland of our southern dynasty. If it were not for the emergency situation at Qingsang City and having no choice but to surface, it would have been a great disaster. Currently, the young men of Liuzhou and the tens of thousands of monk soldiers of Mount Lantua are all under Bailiang's command, and Liuzhou's military strength is increasing instead of decreasing. Furthermore, one of the twin jade annulus of West Chu, Ko Jianghuai, is the general of Liuzhou. Both sides in the Longxiang army are in a tripartite balance of power. Do you have any countermeasures? Zhong Tan said passively, naturally, we cannot touch the young men of Liuzhou, but that Mount Lantua is not impossible to instigate a rebellion. The reason why Mount Lantua is leaning towards Bailiang is because of the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian's goodwill towards the Buddhist sects of the world, and also because of that female bodhisattva. We can work on both fronts. If we cannot kill Su Fengnian, we can try to assassinate that six-jeweled guru. At the same time, we can also make contact with the other powers of Mount Lantua. It is true that our Beimang wants to exterminate Buddhism, but there is no harm in making the eminent monk of Mount Lantua our imperial teacher. However, this will require an imperial decree from your majesty. The Taiping magistrate nodded and said, the imperial decree has been prepared. Zhong Tan was not surprised. He cupped his fists and said, this general is willing to personally go to Mount Lantua in the western regions. After the Taiping magistrate agreed, he said, fourth question, once the matter of Huai and the western regions is settled, can we add some firewood to Shuzhou? Li Mixi smiled and said, that prince surnamed Zhao of Nanzhao, who caused the people under his jurisdiction to complain everywhere, has actually been our Beimang spy for a long time. In the western Shu Dao, there is also an important personage who has been carefully instigated by me to rebel, an official with the rank of administrator. If we say that these two people are helping to lead the troops to cross the border to attack Bailiang, then we are overestimating them. It's just that our Beimang is not enough to deal with major matters, but we have more than enough to deal with Liang. When the time comes, we can use them as sacrificial pawns and let the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, thoroughly turn into a notorious traitor of Liang. First, the great snow dragon cavalry left the territory of the prince of Bailiang without permission. Then, there are two people who used the Bailiang banner to rebel. I believe that the intelligent people of Liang will understand, but the common people of the Central Plains will probably believe it to be true. Probably only when the Bailiang frontier army is wiped out and Su Fengnian is killed in battle will they suddenly realize that, oh, that guy surnamed Su actually did not rebel. Wanyan Jimiang snorted disdainfully. Helian Wue furrowed his brows. Not to mention the usefulness of this kind of sneaky trick, in the end, it was the same as Li Mixi's identity. It could not see the light of day, and it was also difficult for it to be displayed in the halls of elegance. The prefect of peace smiled and said, the true meaning of this move is not to win the hearts of the people of the Central Plains, but to give the Liang imperial court an excellent reason to righteously and confidently restrict the supply of grain. In the hinterland of the Central Plains of Liang, from the king of Jing and Zhao Sun to the administrator Wen Tai to the deputy provincial governor Ma Zhongxian, they have all accumulated grievances with Su Fengnian for a long time. I believe that they will be happy to see this happen. Even if Great Peace City eventually convinces the young emperor of the Zhao family to open up the supply of grain, it is still a good thing to slow them down a step and cause the Bailiang frontier army to lose thousands or even tens of thousands of people. The Empress of Beimang, who had been looking down at the map at her feet, suddenly raised her head and asked, I have a fifth question. That Bailiang claims to have 300,000 cavalry that is the best in the world, and the generals under Su Fengnian are said to be enough to make my Bei Mang and Liang feel ashamed of their inferiority. Then, would like to ask everyone one thing. Chu Lushan, Yan Wenluan, Yuan Zuozong, Qin Yinshui, Ancestor Gu, He Zhonghu, Zhou Kong, and the others. Just Beiliang has so many famous generals of this generation, so many great heads, so why don't my Bei Mang's million-strong army take them? The old woman suddenly took several steps forward and stepped heavily on the map. She said in a clear voice, I don't need you to answer the 5th question. I have a 6th question. Everyone in the hall, who is willing to open up new territory and be conferred the title of king? Everyone in the hall felt their hearts tremble. The old woman laughed loudly. Listen well. Liang has 30 provinces. In the following battle, those who kill Beiliang's third-grade generals, such as Liangzhou's general Shi Fu, Lingzhou's general Han Laozhan, Yozhou's general Huang Fuxi, Yozhou's general Yu Wandao, Liuzhou's general Ko Jianghuai, and the others, will all be conferred the title of Marquis. Those who kill Beiliang's third-grade civil officials, such as Li Gongda, Song Dongming, Yang Guangdou, Chang Sui, Su Beiji, and Qin Shiliang will all be conferred the title of Marquis. Those who kill Qin Yinshui, Ancestor Gu, He Zhonghu, Zhou Kong, and the others will be conferred the title of king. In the future, after annexing Liang, you will have a province in the Central Plains. Those who kill Chu Lushan, Yan Wenluan, Su Longxiang, and Yuan Zuozong will be conferred the title of king and have 2 provinces in the Central Plains of Liang. The old woman's face was ferocious. In the end, she said, those who kill the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, they will be conferred the title of king. They will be the king of the South Courtyard, whose territory includes the entire Central Plains. They will be conferred the title of Prince Liang. Other than the 4 provinces in Beiliang, they can also take any province in the Central Plains. The hall was silent. There was no sound. Dong Zhuo laughed loudly. His eyes were burning. He cupped his fists and said loudly, Your Majesty, I, Dong Zhuo, will gladly accept Chu Lushan's head. Murong Baoding glanced at the map and said with narrowed eyes, Then I will accept the heads of Jean Partridge, Zhou Kong, and the others. Huang Songpu laughed loudly and said, Fortunately, there are still the heads of Su Longxiang, Ko Jianghuai, Yang Guangdou, and Qin Shiliang in Liuzhou. They are still valuable. The old woman slowly walked forward. Step by step, she entered Beiliang's territory on the map and finally stepped on Mount Qingliang. Before it snows this year, I will let every inch of Beiliang be covered in blood. Chapter 1769. Mount Wudong was flourishing. Many pilgrims spared no effort and traveled thousands of li to Mount Wudong to burn incense. Pilgrims from other places were especially numerous in the capital and Jinggan Road. Many of Mount Wudong's Taoist temples, big and small, provided lodging. Even Shaozhu Peak, which had just been opened not too long ago, had an endless stream of pilgrims. Wudong's main peak, Zishu Temple and Elephant Cleansing Pond, Little Lotus Peak's Persimmon Forest and Tortoise Carrying Tablet, and Yuzhu Peak's huge auspicious murals. These scenic spots were undoubtedly fascinating and unique. However, the Wudong Taoist priest's amiability made the pilgrims feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. Even those with high seniority like Chen Zhao and Yu Xingrui, as well as the honorable chief Li Yufu, would always follow the rules set by Ancestor Lu, my mountain Taoist priest, every 10 years, and explain the signs to the pilgrims free of charge. However, the prosperity of Mount Wudong's incense could only be attributed to one person, Su Fengnian, who had once cultivated on the mountain. The Elephant Cleansing Pond, which was not far from his cottage, had now become a place of pilgrimage for the people of Jianghu. It had also attracted countless female pilgrims to Mount Wudong because of its reputation. Burning incense was true, as was their admiration for the Northern Su. That young man was really too legendary. As a vassal with a different surname, he was an extremely high official, and in his hands he controlled Beiliang's 300,000-strong cavalry. As a martial artist, he was ranked among the 4 great grandmasters of Wushu. Moreover, it was said that he was handsome. Word of mouth spread that he was even known as a banished immortal. His style was not inferior to that of West Chu's Chao Chongqing. As a result, an extremely interesting scene appeared on Mount Wudong. Unlike other temples and Taoist temples, Mount Wudong had more and more female pilgrims, and most of them were young women who came with their companions. When Su Fengnian, Li Yufu, and Yufu parted ways in the twilight, the master and disciple continued to climb the mountain towards Mount Wudong, while Su Fengnian went to the thatched cottage. Unexpectedly, he was met with a closed door. Looking from a distance, there was clearly a faint light in the house, but when he approached, the light suddenly went out, and then he knocked on the door. Su Fengnian was somewhat baffled, and only thought that she was embarrassed and did not have the face to live in the same room with him. This made Su Fengnian laugh involuntarily. In fact, when she carried the books up the mountain, the two of them lived together, but it had nothing to do with sharing a bed. He slept on the small bed, and she could only pitifully sleep on the floor in the corner of the room. At that time, His Royal Highness did not have protective feelings for the fairer sex, and the little clay figurine absolutely would not accept his kindness. If Su Fengnian really suggested that she sleep on the floor, she would not be able to sleep soundly, and would only think that His Royal Highness had bad intentions. From this, it could be seen that at that time, the little clay figurine of Mount Qingliang was really badly bullied by His Royal Highness. Two thin wooden doors, just like that, blocked the young lord who had even forced his way into the imperial astronomer's house. Su Fengnian turned around and saw a small bamboo chair that she had probably forgotten to take back into the house. Su Fengnian sat on the chair he had woven himself when he was riding a bull, his hands tucked into his sleeves as he looked up at the bright starry sky. The night sky was as cold as water, but unfortunately, there was no Qing Luo to chase away the fireflies with her little fan. Su Fengnian sat alone for a while, but he was really bored, so under the starlight he went to the vegetable garden adjacent to the hut. It was full of lush greenery that had been taken care of by the little mud men. Many wooden shelves had been set up, covered with vines of cucumbers and loofahs, and many small yellow flowers. Su Fengnian counted some green peppers, and there were even some round watermelons hidden in the greenery. Su Fengnian counted about 5 or 6 of them, all of different sizes. He didn't know if it was because he loved the house and its crow, but Su Fengnian always felt that they were very cute. He thought that when they grew up, he would pick them and ice them in the elephant washing pond. They would definitely be delicious, but perhaps he would be reluctant to eat them. Su Fengnian returned to the small bamboo chair and sat down, closing his eyes, but not thinking about anything. With a creak, the hut's door gently opened, only opening a small gap. Jiang and I secretly looked at the back of that figure, feeling a little uneasy. Since she started climbing the mountain alone, she was used to sleeping on the floor. Later, she gathered her courage and spread the bamboo mat on the small bed. These days, she had a good sleep. Previously, when she heard Su Fengnian's familiar footsteps, the first thing she did was to jump off the bed barefooted, close the door, and throw the bamboo mat on the floor. She lay on the mat and pretended to sleep, covering her ears and pretending to be dead. This series of actions was done in one breath, very much like a master's style. After waiting for a long time, when he got up and left, she returned to sit down, and then there was nothing else. Instead, Jiang and I began to feel apprehensive, not because of her conscience, but because she was afraid that the person who liked to hold grudges the most would come to settle the score. She was in a dilemma for a long time before she gathered her courage and opened the door. In the end, she saw that person sitting quietly outside, without any intention to argue with her. Suddenly, a clear voice sounded, and Jiang and I was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She instantly flew into a rage, feeling distressed and resentful. Su Fengnian. You stole my things. Su Fengnian, who was chewing on a cucumber, turned his head with an expression that deserved a beating. What's yours is mine. What's yours is mine. How can you say that I stole your things? Jiang and I stretched out her hand with a straight face, and resolutely said, pay up. Su Fengnian seemed to have expected this. I don't have any money on me, so I'll owe you first. Tomorrow, I'll borrow some copper coins from Headmaster Li and the others. How many copper coins do you charge me for a cucumber? 1 copper coin or 2 copper coins? Jiang and I hesitated for a moment and confidently said, 2 copper coins. Su Fengnian smiled gently, biting on the cucumber, and vaguely said, you don't know how to bid 3 copper coins? Jiang and I was stunned at first, and then became angry out of humiliation. If you say 2 copper coins, then 2 copper coins. She quickly added, but it can't be the 2 copper coins of the eternal emblem Tongbao. It must be the 2 copper coins of the auspicious talisman Tongbao. Su Fengnian joked, oh, you've collected Hong Jia and the eternal emblem 16 big and small springs. Today, you're planning to collect the auspicious talisman money. Little mud man, your ambition isn't small, huh? Jiang and I angrily said, why do you care? Su Fengnian turned his head, and remained silent. Jiang and I came to his side, and warned Su Fengnian as if guarding against a thief, the watermelon is still small, you can't steal it. Su Fengnian grunted. He didn't know why, but he thought of Wutong'an on Mount Qingliang. The second-class maids had cucumber, green ant, white wine, and so on. The first-class maids had sweet potato and blue bird. Some were still there, and some were no longer there. Jiang and I went back to the house and moved a small chair to sit slightly away from him. She used the corner of her eyes to watch him slowly eat the cucumber, as if he was eating her copper coins. 2 copper coins. Chapter 1770. Su Fengnian stopped chewing. Holding the remaining half of the cucumber, he said softly, Xia Shibian and the others are doing well, you don't have to worry. The Song family has become the leader of the local officials of the new Guangling Dao. The emperor of the Zhao family has specially summoned Song Maolin to the capital to become a scholar of the Hanlin Academy. The former Guangling Dao administrator Wang Xiongui has been able to return to the capital. The new Guangling Dao administrator Wang Xiongui is one of the favorite students of the old Gangnam-do, Yu Jiankang. He is naturally close to the scholars of the Guangling Dao. Once he arrived at the Guangling Dao, he did not immediately go to the yamen to take up a post. Instead, he held a large banquet and called for hundreds of famous scholars of Jiangnan to chat. Additionally, he invited more than 20 Ji Shang from the Shangyin Academy. It can be said to be a rare literary event. Song Li, one of the main generals of the Guangling Dao, immediately married a woman from a powerful family of the Guangling Dao. All these signs indicate that Tai'an City does not wish for the Guangling Dao to have any more waves. Jiang and I did not speak. Su Fengnian turned his head to look. Looking at that beautiful face, he said softly, in this world, there are some things where no one is indispensable. Your luck has always been good, you are also within this usually. Jiang and I said lightly, there is no need to comfort me. I have never felt that West Chu needs me that much. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I am relieved that you can think this way. Jiang and I suddenly asked, then what about Beiliang? Is it impossible without you? Su Fengnian met her gaze and said seriously, of course it is impossible without me. Jiang and I rolled her eyes. Su Fengnian smiled and started eating the cucumber again. If Su Xiao did not die, if my master Li Shan was still alive, if Qin Jibao was willing to assist me in becoming the king of Beimang, if the court did not restrict the northwest border, if the Murong and Yelu families of Beimang had internal strife, if the Beiliang frontier army was not 300,000 but 500,000. It is a pity that there are not so many ifs in the world, so I appear very important. Jiang and I tilted her head. Are you complaining to me? Su Fengnian rolled his eyes at her. I am not bitter. I am clearly showing off to you. Do you still remember? Back then, when I told you that I was such a talented martial arts genius, I only needed 2 or 3 years of practice to become invincible under the heavens. My life was as lonely as an avalanche. What did you think of me then? At that time and now? Jiang and I did not refute with words, but showed a disdainful look as if he had stepped on dog shit and it was a big dog shit hole. Su Fengnian raised his hand and threw the cucumber but high, his face full of pride. I have taken 3 disciples. If there is a martial arts evaluation in Jianghu in the future, then Wang Sheng, Yu Dilong, and Lu Yunchang will definitely be in the top 20. That little bastard Yu Dilong is even expected to be the first. Jiang and I said, Yu Dilong? The child who was a scout in the Yuzhou cavalry. Su Fengnian nodded. He did not expect that the power of Jiang Ni's next sentence was no different from a flying sword taking a head. Even I heard of the famous story of leaning against the wall on the Wudang mountain. He is really the most powerful person in the world. Su Fengnian was stunned. Then Jiang and I heard the master of leaning against the wall murmuring, "Clean up the family." Jiang and I looked up at the Milky Way hanging in the sky. After going to Guangling Road with her uncle, she had always heard the people there call it the Guangling River in the sky. Su Fengnian followed her to look at the river in the sky, murmuring, "I heard that there are hundreds of thousands of mountains in Nanjiang. I heard that the snow in Liaodong is heavier than in the northwest. I heard that there is a butterfly spring in Nanzhao. Countless colorful butterflies are connected head to tail, hanging from the trees to the water." Jiang and I listened to his murmuring and said softly, "Those places that make you yearn for, will you go to see them in the future?" Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes. "Of course." Jiang and I withdrew her gaze. "Tomorrow I want to go to the Purple Void Temple on the top of the mountain to burn incense." Su Fengnian wondered, pray for blessings and make a wish? Or ask for a lot from someone? Jiang and I said unhappily, "It's none of your business." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh. "If I remember correctly, tomorrow there will be Wudang Taoist Master Qinyao personally interpreting the lot. No matter how late you sleep in, I can have the old Taoist immediately interpret the lot for you. Who told me to be Wudang Mountain's heavenly great pilgrim? How could they dare to neglect me?" Jiang and I was about to mock him when Su Fengnian spoke first. "That year, Dong Tai gave me 12 pocket flying swords. Later, in those deadly battles with Han Xingxian, Wang Xianji, and Tuoba, many of them were destroyed and could no longer be assembled into a set. Later on, I had the Mahist master craftsman at the back of Mount Qingliang forge a new set of 9 swords, each of which is compatible with my different sword intents. The names of the 9 flying swords are Fengdu, Yishen, Yu, Shujing, Lao Jiao, Mei Zhu, Qiao Chu, Wild Fox, and Yang Ji. How about it, doesn't it sound very interesting?" Jiang and I bluntly said, "Sour, really sour." Su Fengnian laughed loudly. After he restrained his smile, he reminded him softly, "That's right, when you burn incense tomorrow, there are some trivial matters that I have to tell you first, so that you won't be a headless fly running around randomly. You don't need a lot of incense. You can't just buy a bunch to show your sincerity. 3 sticks of incense are enough. Moreover, the copper coins for the incense must be paid by the person making the wish and cannot be borrowed. In Wudang, there is a difference between burning incense in the temple and burning incense in the altar. The former pays particular attention to the fact that the incense does not exceed an inch, and the latter is best with sandalwood incense. Real pilgrims bring their own incense, unlike you who are cramming at the last minute." "Oh, wrong, cramming at the feet of Zhenwu the great emperor. That seems even more wrong. After entering the Taoist temple, men on the left and women on the right. No matter if it is the stairs or the threshold, do not walk in the middle. When you make a wish, do not casually promise to provide for them in the future. This is the same principle in Taoist temples and temples. Whether it is a bodhisattva or a true immortal, they do not lack your incense. Also, burning incense in Wudang is said to be the most effective way to pray for peace and prosperity. Remember not to make a wish that is too big. In the future, if your wish comes true, don't forget to fulfill it." Listening to Su Fengnian's tireless nagging, Jiang Ni's state of mind was peaceful, and there was even some warmth in his heart that made people feel warm. However, Su Fengnian did not let Jiang and I down. His last sentence revealed his true colors of a fox. "The most important thing is that it is also possible to make a wish on Wudang Mountain to give birth to a child early." Jiang and I took a deep breath. She thought of the great gung horn under the moon swearing to kill Post. At the end, Jiang and I swore to kill Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian looked at the scenery of her chest trembling when she breathed and said with a smile, "Little clay figurine, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes." Jiang and I sneered. She was no longer the little clay figurine who always lost in bickering in the past. Now, she had a bit of the style of His Majesty the Emperor of West Chu. The next day, the sky was slightly bright. when the melodious morning bell of Wudang Mountain sounded at the same time. On the square outside of Wudang Mountain's main peak, Big Lotus Peak, stood hundreds of Wudang Taoist priests of various generations. Not only that, there were hundreds of pilgrims who either stayed here last night or climbed the mountain in the dark. Together, they practiced the fist technique that was said to be found by the previous chief Hong Shixiang from ancient books. It was round and smooth, fair and peaceful. There were 3 people leading the fist technique. The current chief of Wudang, Li Yufu, and his disciple, Yufu. There was also the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, who wore a green robe and a jade pendant. A cool breeze blew gently. It was natural. The mountain was full of fog, immortal air, chivalrous air, and spiritual air. Jiang and I, who had originally vowed to burn incense alone, secretly stood at the back of the square. She stood on her tiptoes and looked at the slender figure. Hearing the shameless whispers of many female pilgrims, she smiled and 2 dimples appeared on both sides of her cheeks. After Jiang and I finished practicing with Su Fengnian, she openly walked through the crowd. Under the eyes of everyone, especially those women, she blushed slightly and took his hand. He said last night that his martial arts practice began at Wudang Mountain. Then his Jianghu should also end at Wudang Mountain. Between the beginning and the end, and even after the beginning, there would be her. Chapter 1771. In the battle between the 2 countries, the spies died first. In the battle between the 2 countries, the scouts died first. In the battle of Liangmang, the spies and scouts all died. In the 2nd year of Liang Xiangfu, in the heat of the summer, the battle had not yet officially begun, but outside the northwest pass there was already an atmosphere of impending mountain rain. Unlike the spies on both sides of the border who were wandering around and watching each other, after the furious Empress of Beimang issued an order, groups of Bailiang crossbowmen and Beimang cavalry began to exchange lives with each other, almost fighting to the death when they saw each other. In a short period of 20 days, more than 40 battles, big and small, the Bailiang's White Horse crossbowmen had already suffered more than 800 casualties. Dongzhuo's Black Crow cavalry and Lu Gui's Black Fox cavalry were the main force of Beimang scouts, and they had lost more than 1,000 cavalry. As for the mixed cavalry from the southern dynasty's Longguan border army, they were even more numerous. In the world, probably only on this battlefield where yellow sand was flying could there be such extravagant large-scale battles between the enemy and their own side. It should be known that in the history of the Central Plains, there was no lack of records of a few hundred roving bandits being able to plunder several provinces, so much so that the capital was shaken. From this, it could be seen that whether it was the scouts at the front line, the light cavalry in the field, or the heavy cavalry used to make the final decision, Liang Mang had reached the peak of cavalry battle strength that would make later generations gasp in amazement. As the situation of the scouts on the border around Huda City became more and more desperate, this also meant that their military strength was even greater than the previous Beimang army, and they were about to stake everything on one throw and move out in full force. When the time came, the grassland would be empty, and they would mobilize all their troops and horses to the south and kowtow to Liangzhou. Before autumn, a battle decided that most of the scouts on both sides of Liangmang were unable to last until autumn. Yilu Chukai, the brother-in-law of the previous southern courtyard Great King Dongzhuo, the commander of the Black Fox Bars, and Lin Fu, the trusted aide and favorite general of the great general Lu Gui, the commander of the Black Fox Bars, used 200 Qilong Pass horse bars to lure the enemy deep into the Dragon Eye Plains, with a total of 1,400 elite cavalry. They lured Sun Ji, one of the 3 captains of the Liangzhou White Horse crossbowmen, into charging alone into the hinterland of the Dragon Eye Plains, about 160 li north of the Huda city. Captain Sun Ji died on the spot, while the other 3 captains died on the way to the rear. Only 120 crossbowmen managed to break out of the siege and retreated to the southern end of the Dragon Eye Plains. All of them were wounded, but they were still cut off by Lin Fu's 200 Black Fox Bars. At this time, the cavalry under Lin Fu's command was between more than 100 Bailiang crossbowmen and Huda city. Behind him, the silhouette of the former most majestic city at the border of the Liang dynasty could be faintly seen. After Dongzhuo broke into the city, he had climbed up the city wall and personally broken a flag with the word Su. Lin Fu was wearing light armor and riding an extraordinarily handsome rouge horse. He was a remnant of the spring and autumn period who had personally experienced Lu Gui's journey to the north. Originally, Lu Gui had used his military exploits to become the main force of Lu Gui's army. Logically speaking, he didn't need to personally lead the army and participate in this scout battle. However, the Black Fox bars were old generals' blood, sweat, and tears. Furthermore, Lin Fu, whose ancestors were from a prominent family in the central plains of Qing province, also had an old score to settle with the Su family. Thus, he wanted to collect some interest first. Moreover, although there weren't many scouts on either side, it was obvious that the emperor and a large group of generals were all staring at the battle reports that were sent to the imperial court. Even his benefactor, Lu Gui, who had never had any unique experience as an official, had told him in private that Lin Fu had to perform well this time. Whether or not Lin Fu could advance further in the future, and whether or not he could turn from Lu Gui's trusted aide to an important official of the Southern Dynasty, depended on this battle. Previously, Lin Fu, who had chased after the stray dogs of Bailiang all the way to the south and didn't engage in close combat, had been very leisurely. He hadn't drawn his bow or drawn his saber. Therefore, the 200 Black Fox bars beside him, who had been conserving their strength, were naturally more powerful than the wounded crossbowmen in front of him. In the end, they suddenly sped up and circled to the front of the Bailiang cavalry, looking very relaxed. The Bailiang cavalry was the best in the world, and the White Horse crossbowmen were crowned the Liang cavalry. Sitting high on his horse, Lin Fu couldn't help but snort. It wasn't that he underestimated the strength of the Bailiang crossbowmen responsible for the direction of Huda's city, but as a generals, Lin Fu didn't think it was worth it to die in such a cowardly manner when the enemy had such a large disparity in numbers. At the same time, Lin Fu also felt that it wasn't enough to fight to his heart's content. There were 3 groups of cavalry outside of Liangzhou's pass. The veteran captain Sun Ji was in the middle, Wei Tumu was stationed at the border of Liangzhou's Liangyu region, where the 2 heavy cavalry groups of Bailiang had quietly exited the pass, and the new young captain Li Hanlan's 600 cavalry mainly roamed to the north of the Qingyuan military town in Liangzhou's west gate. This time, in order to take down all of Sun Ji's crossbowmen in one go, Lin Fu had no choice but to invite the royal descendant Yelu Chutsai's crowbars to participate in this hunt. He really didn't have any confidence in the useless horse bars trained by the nobles of Longguan in the south. They were practically a disgrace to the name of Beimang's horse bars. In a battle of equal numbers, they had no chance of victory against the Bailiang's White Horse cavalry. No wonder they were laughed at by the Bailiang frontier army as donkey bars. Chapter 1772. One of the deputy captains glanced at the 100 or so Bailiang cavalry that were fighting and retreating at the same time. His eyes burned with desire. He patted his horse and came to Lin Fu's side. "General, what should we do next? We can't just give all our military merits to that outsider named Yelu, right? General, look, that guy named Sun Ji's head is hanging on the back of Dongzhuo's brother-in-law's horse. Our brothers are all jealous. According to His Majesty's words, a crossbowman's head is very precious. If you add on the head of Wei Tumu or Li Hanlan, you can almost be made a marquis. Hey, General, are you really not tempted?" Lin Fu looked around, hesitated for a moment, and then gave an answer that greatly discouraged his deputy. "There's no rush. Let's waste some of the Bailiang cavalry's spirit. We'll continue to retreat. We just need to block their retreat." With this order, the Black Fox guards followed the movements of the Bailiang crossbowmen and continued to retreat slowly, like a pack of wolves on the grasslands waiting for an opportunity to strike. Lin Fu had a keen intuition that had been nurtured by many years of war. Sun Ji, who had taken the bait and lost his life, was of course a big fish. However, there might not be only one big fish that took the bait. If he pulled the rod too early, the fishing line would break. Yelu Chukai, who was leading the chase, suddenly tilted his head slightly and easily dodged a crossbow bolt. Behind him, the crow rider was frightened and broke out in a cold sweat, but he still used his bow arm to deflect the bolt. This crow rider, who used to be a horse catcher, was furious. He whipped his horse and spun the lasso, accurately wrapping it around the neck of a white horse crossbowman at the back of the enemy cavalry. With a strong pull, he pulled the crossbowman off the horse. The Baelyang rider who fell heavily to the ground tried to stand up, but the crow rider had already bent down and slid his blade across the neck. Just as the head was about to fall into his hands, another crow rider extended his blade and stabbed the head. He brushed past the head and laughed loudly, skillfully hanging the head on the side of his saddle. The crow rider who had been riding earlier couldn't help but curse. However, when he lowered his head and saw the 4 or 5 heads on both sides of his saddle, he didn't care anymore. Yelu Chukai grinned. The most valuable head of the Baelyang crossbowman was hanging on the side of his horse. After a long chase, it no longer looked like it was dripping with blood. The blood where the head had been severed had dried up. With a distance of about 50 paces, the arrows from both sides flew back and forth. Crow riders and Baelyang crossbowmen constantly fell off their horses after being shot. Most of them died from being shot in the face. However, after dying in battle, all of the Baelyang cavalry had their heads chopped off. There were even some Baemang horsemen in the rear who didn't gain much battle merit who would vent their anger by shooting a few arrows at the headless corpses. Otherwise, they would directly drive their horses over the corpses on the ground. Crow riders and Longguan scouts, who had the absolute advantage, slowed down and sped up through tacit understanding. They constantly rotated. Many of the horsemen roamed around the Baelyang crossbowmen's flanks and shot at them. Some of the horsemen even waved their blades and shouted loudly, showing off their might. In particular, when someone used the fancy method of hiding in the belly of a horse to avoid the Baelyang crossbowmen's arrows, it even drew the strange cries of a large group of horsemen. Their momentum was like a rainbow. Yelu Chukai suddenly felt a bit dispirited, because the number of Baelyang crossbowmen decreased as he killed more and more. There were less than 100 of them left. More importantly, the two groups of people in charge of breaking out of the enemy's encirclement and bringing up the rear, these two groups of cavalry who would definitely die in front of their fellow soldiers seemed to always be the most important figures among the crossbowmen. From Lieutenant Sun Ji to the 3 senior captains and several deputy captains, to the few remaining crossbowmen's captains, they were all like this. Yelu Chukai narrowed his eyes as he looked at these elite soldiers of the Baelyang frontier army who, from beginning to end, had fought silently and died silently. A wave of anger rose in his chest for no reason. This valiant general who had participated in the first battle of Liang Mang's Great War had a gloomy expression. He squeezed his horse's belly and charged forward, quickly passing by a few crow's fences. In an instant, the distance between the enemy and his warhorses was shortened to less than 10 paces. The crossbowman who turned his head and saw this scene silently threw away his light crossbow and pulled out his cold blade. Blood flowed from his arm. Before he could kill the enemy, the blade in his hand was already dyed red. The large rouge horse under Yelu Chukai was already running neck and neck with the enemy. Without waiting for the crossbowman to swing his blade, Yelu Chukai viciously sliced off the head of the crossbowman. With a flick of his wrist, the head was lifted high into the air. Then, it was shot through by an arrow from a crow-riding soldier with sharp eyes. The head that rolled on the ground was then stabbed by a soldier behind Baemang with his blade, becoming a battle achievement. The scouts of both sides were running all over the long border. For a cavalry of more than 1,000 to move without anyone noticing was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Only the elite cavalry under Dongzhuo's command, like the crow-riding soldiers, could move hundreds of cavalry without making a sound. More accurately speaking, they had enough strength to clear out all the nearby spies. Not only did they win the battle of contact, they also had to completely cut off the small groups of crossbowmen's transmission of military intelligence, causing them to be paralyzed on the battlefield. If one looked down from the sky at the southern end of the Longyan Plains, the two cavalry forces were like a moving carpet. It was just that on the carpet, there was blood constantly sputtering. Chapter 1773. Sun Ji's white horse crossbowmen, who had been invincible outside the pass for more than 10 years, were now left with only 60 or so riders. Blocking the path ahead were 200 Black Fox bars under Lin Fu's command. For some reason, there were also 200 Black Fox bars further away that had yet to show their faces. They were merely moving about in a concealed manner. Chasing behind them were 300 Crow Lanzi and 400 Longguan Horse Lanzi. This was actually all the Beimang Border Horse Lanzi had. Of course, if the second and third-rate Beimang Horse Lanzi were included, the overall strength could be doubled. 20 years ago, Northern Liang Border Army's crossbowmen numbered more than 2,600 cavalry. After this battle, if Sun Ji's troops were completely wiped out, then only Li Hanlin and Wei Tumu, these two officers, would be left with just over 1,000 cavalry troops. Suddenly, just as Lin Fu's Black Fox Lanzi had unknowingly arrived at the edge of the Longyan Plains, the 60 or so white horse crossbowmen all turned their horses around. They did not continue to try to break out of the encirclement, but turned their backs to Huda City, to Liangzhou, and to Beiliang. When the Beiliang crossbowmen collectively made this inconceivable movement, Yelu Chukai, although realizing that something was wrong, did not stop his attack at all. He took the lead and charged over. In his view, even if something unexpected happened, as long as he could swallow up these remnants, there was nothing wrong with it. Brother-in-law Dong Zhuo had a catchphrase, saying that the good things in the world were only truly good things when they were in one's pocket. Otherwise, no matter how good something was, as long as it was not in one's hands, it was useless. In a close-distance cavalry battle, the Liang Mang cavalry all drew their blades in tacit understanding. At this time, 2 bugle horns sounded from different places, vigorous and solemn. It was as if they were paying tribute to the dead, to the comrades who had lost their heads. In a battle of scouts, the bugle horn should not have appeared on the battlefield. Lin Fu and Yelu Chukai, the 2 commanders of the Horse Lanzi, followed the sudden bugle horn and looked in different directions. Lin Fu looked into the distance to the right, where a cavalry troop covered in blood was charging over. A tall and sturdy Beiliang cavalry general raised the head of a Beimang Horse Lanzi, roaring angrily, "Beiliang crossbowman Wei Musheng is here. The 200 Black Fox Lanzi are all dead." Meanwhile, in Yelu Chutsai's line of sight, a cavalry troop numbering around 500 solemn, breaking through the yellow sand and dust, galloping over. The cavalry general in the lead silently said, "Sun Ji, commander, Lin Hanlin, will wipe out the Crow Lanzi. The riders at his side were all comrades who had slaughtered their way into Southern Dynasty's Gentleman's Pavilion military town, uprooting countless Northern Mang beacons along the way, Zongpuzi Ludo, Li Shiyue, Fang Hudu. At this moment, Lin Fu and Yelu Chukai understood that even without mentioning the Longguan scouts, just their Crow Lanzi and Black Fox Lanzi, even if they encountered other large-scale Beiliang cavalry, even if there were tens of thousands of Beiliang light cavalry troops, the 2 Horse Lanzi would still be able to safely retreat. Unfortunately, they encountered those 2 white horse crossbowmen, unable to escape, unable to retreat. Yelu Chukai turned his head to look at the strange Horse Lanzi mixed in with the cavalry on his side. They did not carry bows or sabers, and did not even wear armor. During the pursuit of Sun Ji's crossbowmen, they did not make a move at all. It was because they were martial artists from one of the 5 great sects of Beimang, Ti Bing Shan's son-in-law, his brother-in-law, Dong Zhuo, his personal retainers. This group of hidden Jianghu experts was also the reason he dared to lead his troops near Huda City. Yelu Chukai originally did not want these Jianghu people to participate in the battle, but now it seemed that if they did not participate, his brother-in-law's Crow Lanzi would definitely suffer a great loss. Without needing to communicate, Lin Fu led the 200 Black Fox Lanzi to meet Wei Musheng's White Horse crossbowmen, while Yelu Chukai led his troops to meet Li Hanlin's 500 cavalry crossbowmen. The 400 Long Pass scouts were responsible for taking care of the remaining 60 cavalry of Sun Ji's troops, and then reinforcing the Black Fox Lanzi who were temporarily at a disadvantage. Once one of the main forces of Liangzhou arrived and entered the battlefield, Beimang's 3 Horse Lanzi would of course risk great losses to quickly retreat. But right now, in this type of close battle, even if they knew that the 3 White Horse crossbowmen had created a dangerous situation, Lin Fu and Yelu Chukai were still unwilling to retreat. Lin Fu led the 200 Black Fox Lanzi to meet Wei Musheng's crossbowmen head-on, while glancing back at Huda City. Lin Fu was waiting to see. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind, unaware of the slingshot below. Now, it was time to see who would have the last laugh. If nothing unexpected happened, today's battle, one side of the border scouts would definitely die at the border. Chapter 1774. Lin Fu's benefactor, Lu Gui, as one of the 4 leading generals in the Second Battle of Liangmang, stationed his troops outside Gourd Mouth in Yuzhou, far away from the battlefield in Liangzhou, in order to prevent the same mistake from happening again. Therefore, he could not solve the thirst outside Liangzhou Pass. The reason why Lin Fu dragged Yellow Chutsai's black crowbar into this hunt was because firstly, he wanted to wrap dumplings and eat Sun Ji's crossbowmen. Secondly, Lin Fu was ambitious. He purposely gave the military merit to Yellow Chukai in order to make friends with Dong Zhuo, who had just resigned as the king of the southern courtyard. He also wanted to persuade Fatty Dong, who would not act unless he saw a rabbit, to mobilize 8,000 of the Dong family's private cavalry to follow behind the horse bars from afar. This was to deal with the field light cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass that might quickly enter the Longyan Plains, such as Luya and Fuling's cavalry troops behind Huda City, so that they could report back to the king before the battle began. This was why Lin Fu had no choice but to hand over the head of Bailiang Sun Ji with both hands in the previous battle. His black crowbar was like a spectator from the beginning to the end. Dong Zhuo once laughed and asked Lin Fu if he was not afraid that all his efforts would be in vain. After all his efforts would go to his brother-in-law's military merit in the end. Lin Fu did not mince his words. Since both sides of Liangmang wanted to wipe out the enemy scouts in one fell swoop, completely blinding the enemy, Lin Fu believed in his own intuition. He believed that the Liangzhou border army, whose resources were not as deep as his own, would definitely not allow several hundred crossbowmen to die in front of their eyes. Once the main force of Bailiang's cavalry entered the battlefield, the military merit would be enormous. However, Lin Fu felt that it was a pity. Only Dong Zhuo was willing to accompany him to the gambling table. But when he went to see Commandant Murong Baoding and the commander of the Ruran cavalry, Hong Jingyan, in an attempt to persuade them to join him in this grand hunt that had a high chance of triggering the Great Battle of Liangmang, to his surprise, Murong Baoding, who was in charge of attacking Liangzhou's defensive line alongside Dong Zhuo, actually scoffed. Hong Jingyan, on the other hand, was hesitant. In the end, the Ruran cavalry was temporarily under Murong Baoding's command. Without a military order, the Ruran cavalry could not be mobilized on their own accord. As the Black Fox Guards and the White Horse crossbowmen drew closer and closer, Lin Fu suddenly saw a comical sight. Beside Lieutenant Wei Muxing's horse was a child who could barely be called a youth. Riding on a large horse, he looked like a large horse carrying a small piece of charcoal. The child was not wearing the Bailiang standard light armor of the crossbowman. Instead of a sword, he carried a cold saber on his back. It looked very absurd. Of course, Lin Fu did not believe that the Bailiang cavalry was lacking in soldiers to such an extent. This was because in the first great battle of Liangmang, it was said that a young rider had followed the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, to battle outside Gourd Mouth of Yuzhou. He killed people like scything wheat, using his 2 fists to kill 100 people. Lin Fu suddenly understood. It was no wonder that not a single person from the Black Fox Guards had survived to report back. There was an 80 to 90% chance that they had been killed by this person. Lin Fu did not dare to lower his guard in the slightest. As if he was facing a great enemy, he intentionally or unintentionally avoided the saber-carrying child in his charge. On Yellow Chutsai's side of the battlefield, a group of 50 or so Tibing Mountain Wufu led the charge and killed the crossbowman Lieutenant Li Hanlin in one fell swoop. Li Hanlin did not change his route and continued forward in a straight line. In the past, the young man who was cursed together with His Royal Highness, Yan Qiji, and Kong Wuqi as one of the 4 evils of Bailiang, the one who thought that he would spend the rest of his life fooling around among the flowers. His face was still as handsome as ever, but it was no longer sickly white. Instead, it was slightly tanned and angular. In these 3 years, he had risen from the lowest level of crossbowman outside Liangzhou Pass, to squad leader, squad leader, squad leader, vice captain, and commandant. Step by step, he had become the lieutenant of today, the commander of the world's most invincible 800 White Horse crossbowmen. His fellow soldiers, his old squad leaders, and commandants had all died in battle before the eyes of this young man whose father was the Bailiang prefect of Taoism. The only familiar faces who had joined the army at the beginning were Lu Do, Li Shiyue, and Fang Hudu. Li Hanlin remembered the first time he met Brother Nian, who had returned from Liangjiang Lake to Mount Qingliang. At that time, Li Hanlin was still very much looking forward to Jianghu. He listened to Su Fengnian talk about the anecdotes of the Wulin world, about the strength of heroes, the charm of fairies, and the style of grandmasters. Li Hanlin considered the fact that he had never experienced Jianghu as his greatest regret. Later, he left the rich Lingzhou in Jiangnan and came alone to the unfamiliar Liangzhou Pass. As far as his eyes could see, there were only military forts, yellow sand that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, the boiling hot Gobi Desert, the stubborn vegetation that was hard to see, and the unbearably smelly horse dung. Beside him, there were only 3 things he could rely on. Li Hanlin exhaled heavily. Lu Do. The heavy-eyed Lu Do nodded. Expressionlessly, he led the charge out of the cavalry formation. At the same time, a rider followed him out on a fast horse. It was a young female swordsman who did not fit in with this group of white horse crossbowmen. She was full of heroic spirit, the type of girl whose beauty was not too outstanding, but could still make people's eyes light up. The young girl carried many swords on her back. Ever since she became the personal retainer of Captain Li Hanlin, she naturally attracted a lot of attention. But when they heard that she was the eldest disciple of the prince, none of the white horse crossbowmen dared to joke around. No one dared to call her the nickname, Sword Girl. Some of the younger crossbowmen were even somewhat disheartened. The young female swordsman called Wang Sheng turned her head and glanced at Li Hanlin. Li Hanlin responded with a smile. His eyes indicated that he would not forget her master's warning. After the old woman of Beimang declared that she would exterminate all the crossbowmen of Beiliang, and especially after it was rumored that she had specifically mentioned his name, Li Hanlin, in front of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court, Su Fengnian very quickly had Wang Sheng enter the crossbowmen as a temporary scout. He also sent a message to Li Hanlin. That message had nothing to do with heroic words, nothing to do with soul-stirring emotions. Do not die so easily. The meaning of these words was that he, Li Hanlin, could die when he needed to, but he had to die a worthy death. Li Hanlin did not feel that there was anything wrong with these words. On the contrary, as a crossbowman captain who was used to a military life and had seen many deaths, he felt that only such words were worthy of their 20 years of brotherly love. Sun Ji, I, Li Hanlin, will collect your corpse today. If I die, Brother Nian, there is no need to trouble you to collect my corpse. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Liang Mang used their own scouts as bait. Yuan Nanting led 10,000 white feather guards and Qi Dang led 6,000 iron stupas. Based on the strategy of the Huaiyang Pass, they entered the battlefield of the Dragon Eye one after the other. The 8,000 Dongzhuo elite cavalry and the 6,000 Ruren cavalry of Hong Jingyan, who had changed his mind for some reason, also entered the battlefield one after the other. This encounter, which had been planned by both sides long ago and was full of variables, happened so abruptly that no one was prepared for it. Murong Baoding's army could not send reinforcements in time. The Beiliang cavalry of Liu